Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Helen stopped her expensive SUV on a narrow path that led deep into the forest. There were trees growing all around, trying to hide the small abandoned village where, as it turned out, her mother, Mrs. Kate, had lived for some time. The smell of autumn was in the air, not yet cold, but already fresh and heralding change. Helen sighed sadly. She tried to calm the nervous trembling in her hands. How many years had she dreamed of this moment? How many nights had she spent looking at an old photograph of her mum, the only memory of the past? Getting out of the car, she looked around and adjusted her sunglasses, though she didn't really need them now. But Helen couldn't afford to look unkempt, even in the shadows of the deep woods. In the years since her escape from the village of Sosnovka, she had grown accustomed to luxury, knew that money solved any problem, but not this one. The old abandoned cemetery was located in the forest. It was hard to say why exactly the locals started burying their relatives here. Once long ago they had cleared the area, leveled it, and prepared a neat clearing for burial. Approaching the entrance to the abandoned cemetery, Helen felt uncomfortable. It's not a good idea to go here alone, she thought anxiously as she looked round at the scene before her eyes. Indeed, it was sad and wistful. Green moss covered the old tombstones. Even the stones, once fresh white, had turned gray, drowning in the green of the grass. The entrance was guarded by two trunks of age-old trees that leaned their crowns towards each other, as if forming a small corridor. The sun's rays did not often reach here, which made the grass underfoot a lush carpet. A ringing silence, only occasionally interrupted by the whisper of the wind, which brought with it the scent of damp earth and pine needles. Some of the graves had old metal crosses, shriveled and rusty, while others had simple marble monuments on which the carved inscriptions could hardly be distinguished. At the very back of the cemetery was a small house, which had apparently once served as a chapel. Its shabby roof, its walls covered with wild grapes, looked uncomfortable. Helen grimaced and began to walk between the rows of graves, trying to find where her mother had been buried. According to the private detective who had managed to get on the trail of Mrs. Kate Priestley, she had died 5 years ago. Stepfather William had passed away 2 years earlier, having drowned in a lake on a drunken errand. Going into the village itself was not something Helen wanted to do. For one thing, she had never been here before, for her mother and stepfather had moved here the year after she had escaped. Tears glistened in the corners of her eyes. As she walked from grave to grave, she flinched each time, expecting to see a plaque with her mother's name on it. After a long search, she finally came upon a small grave overgrown with wild ivy. At that moment, her heart beat harder with some inexplicable feeling. Helen realized this was the place. Mrs. Kate Priestley, she read the inscription silently, moving her lips. At the same instant, Helen fell to her knees as if the whole world around her had collapsed. During the long years she had spent away from her home, she had stubbornly hidden the memories of her mother in her heart. But now it all came flooding out with every tear running down her cheeks. Helen felt torrents of bitter resentment and regret fill her heart. "Mummy, darling, but why didn't I come to you sooner? Why did I run away, leaving you alone?" She gently placed her hands on the cold tombstone. "I'm back. I'm here." Her words sounded like a promise, being more like an oath. At the same moment, Helen felt her mum's invisible presence. The sky overhead began to clear of clouds, and the first rays of sunlight breaking through the foliage, as if whispering, "You are not alone, my daughter." A moment later, she heard a quiet voice behind her. "Auntie, why are you crying? Did you recognize Grandma Kate?" Helen flinched in surprise and turned round sharply. Behind her stood a little girl of about 8 years old, holding a small bowl of mushrooms and a handful of berries. Helen exhaled a sigh of relief. Yes, I knew Mrs. Kate Priestley well. She would not tell the little girl the truth, for she felt embarrassed that she was not the best daughter. She never asked her anything like that. "Would you like some berries? My name is Emily. I pick berries and mushrooms here every day. There's a nice clearing not far from here. Would you like me to show you?" Helen thought for a moment, then shook her head no. Wandering around the woods was not part of her plans today. She had to return home immediately because there were important negotiations with business partners waiting for her there. She didn't have much hope for her husband Ethan. She always tried to do everything herself, but still, wanting to please this sweet little girl, Helen went over and took a few berries from her box. "My name is Mrs. Helen," the businesswoman added, "but you can just call me Aunt Helen." Emily nodded as if she fed berries to visitors from the city every day. Whether it was Emily's treats or just seeing the little girl that cheered Helen up, she was in a better mood. "Listen, where do you live now? It's a bit of a wilderness out here. Aren't you afraid to wander alone?" Emily looked at her new acquaintance with a smile. "No, I'm not afraid," Emily said. "I live near here with my grandfather. He mostly fishes, and I gather mushrooms and berries." Helen thought for a moment, then asked, "Where are your parents? Do you come here on holidays?" Emily shook her head sadly and looked away. "No, my parents are lying a few graves away from Grandma Kate. The river took them when the dam broke. Mom and Dad rushed to save the farm. We used to have chickens, cows, sheep. But they didn't have time. The wave was so big, it washed everything away. And my mom and dad too. Grandpa found them later, but not immediately, but when he took the boat. I've been living with him ever since." Tears glistened in Helen's eyes at the girl's story. It would seem that there was nothing special in these words, but that's if you put aside emotions and do not think about the death of her parents. The village along the riverbank often suffered from floods. Still, Helen felt sorry for this girl, orphaned at such a young age. "Look, is there anything I can do to help you?" Taking another berry, Helen asked. Luckily, she had some cash in her purse, although the bulk of it was, of course, on bank cards. "No, that's all right. Let me tell your fortune for free, just for tasting my berries," Emily suggested. Helen shuddered in surprise. "A fortune teller? Can you do that?" The girl smiled. "Of course I can. Aunt Helen, Matthew's grandfather, says I got this gift from my grandmother, though I've never met her." "And what does your gift manifest itself in?" Helen asked curiously, cautiously. "Cautiously. How? For instance, I help my grandfather Matthew to find a place to fish where the bite is good. I walk along the bank, put my hand in the water, and feel where the fish are feeding." Helen shook her head. Still, the story of such a little girl seemed rather strange. But what made her think it was true? A grown woman believes in fairy tales. But what child doesn't fantasize at that age? Perhaps Emily imagined herself a little witch who could turn a pumpkin into a carriage and a rat into a coachman with a wave of her wand. "Well, do you want a reading or not? But be warned, everything I say comes true," Emily persisted. Helen looked at her with a smile. How could she refuse? "Come on, which hand, right or left?" "I don't care," Emily said. Helen readily put out her left hand, for she had been left-handed since birth. It was always the subject of ridicule at school, as if she were different from everyone else. Meanwhile, Emily closed her eyes and ran her fingers over her palm. "So I see you're going to go somewhere you don't need to be." Helen froze for a moment. "What do you mean by that? Why shouldn't I go there? It's my home, after all. I can see the road, and there are trials there. It won't be an easy journey, but you have to pick up the first traveling companion on the way. Then we can save ourselves," she added, and let go of my hand. Helen frowned and thought to herself, what's a hitchhiker got to do with it? No, this is some kind of childish fantasy. She glanced at the little girl and asked quietly, "How do I know it's the traveling companion you're talking about?" Emily smiled. "Don't worry, Aunt Helen, you'll know straight away." Helen looked at her mother's monument again, still under the impression of such a strange encounter. Meanwhile, Emily gave her some more berries and walked down the path leading to the village. Helen realized just in time, and taking the money out of her purse, hurried after her. "Wait, Emily, here, take this, buy yourself something tasty." "Well, it's for the berries, and for the fortune-telling too. I'm sorry I don't have any more on me." "I gave what I could," Helen said. Emily looked at her, but didn't take the money. "No, Aunt Helen. I was just doing a fortune telling. You don't take money for that. My grandfather said my grandmother always read fortunes for free. Only then it all came true. Helen paused for a moment, then carefully put the money in the bag. Tell you what, give this to your granddad. It's his payment for bringing up such a good granddaughter, okay? And you did the fortune telling for free. And I'm not paying you for that. Emily smiled, realizing how cleverly she'd been played. Really, in a good way. The girl didn't resist any longer and, waving her basket, went home. Helen stood on the country road for some time, wondering what to do next. She had found her mother's grave and personally assessed the scale of the work to be done. Firstly, she wanted to hire a construction crew to lay tiles all around the perimeter. Then they would replace the fence and put up a new monument. Realizing that there was still a little time, Helen decided to clear the grass from the grave mound. After all, it would take more than a week for the team to make an estimate and buy the material, and the grave would remain unattended all that time. It was not good. It took Helen about half an hour to rid the plot of weeds. She worked without pause, not noticing the pain in her fingers. It seemed to her that at that moment, just as in her childhood, she was weeding the garden under the watchful eye of her mother, who was shoveling a few meters away from her. At last, having accomplished her purpose, Helen crossed herself, and then kissed the photograph of her mother on the monument. Since the sun hardly lit up the cemetery, she found the picture cold and covered in fumes. Helen shifted her gaze to the face of her wristwatch and realized that she should hurry to get behind the wheel of the car in time. The young businesswoman remembered that Emily might not be referring to the house, but to the business meeting she was going to go to as soon as she arrived in town. Well, we'll see. The important thing is to make the first step, and then we'll see, Helen thought. Smiling, she got behind the wheel and started the engine, and at that very moment a message from her husband came on the phone. Helen, how soon will you be? Or should I start without you in case Ethan asked? She smiled and immediately wrote back, Ethan, I'll be in time. Don't start negotiations without me. There was no reply, although the delivery report of the message did come. However, the husband was always willful. The man pulled the blanket on himself at every opportunity, both in business and in family life. Helen was repeatedly told by acquaintances that Ethan was not her match, that she was a successful woman who had made herself, having come from a remote, God-forsaken village. She never took such words seriously, because people did not know even a tenth of what she had to go through to achieve material prosperity. Helen's journey to the top of the financial Olympus was painful and thorny. Perhaps if she had a normal family, she would never in the world would not have moved to the city, having climbed into a passing goods wagon as a teenager. Of her personal belongings, little Helen had only an old toy bear that she clutched to her chest. Instead of the now familiar synthetic upholstery, that bear was filled with sawdust, which squeaked every time it was clasped in her hands and shaken. The bear still stood in the most prominent place in the office, causing bewilderment to employees and company guests alike. Helen, on the other hand, regarded the bear as her talisman. When she wanted something to come true, for example, she would go up to it and stroke its head. Then she would hold the bear against her, and it would make a characteristic squeaking sound caused by the movement of the internal sawdust. Ethan had asked her more than once to scrap it. Why do you keep this relic of the past in your office? Ethan asked. Look at it. You could scare children with it. All right, you don't want to throw it in the landfill. Let me give it to someone. By God, you're just embarrassing the company. But Helen just shook her head. No, Ethan, he is dear to me as a memory. Once it was my brother, she smiled meaningfully, not wanting to tell about those years when the bear saved her from the wrath of drunken stepfather William, who every night made a scandal. Mrs. Kate Priestley tried her best to protect her daughter from the attacks of her alcoholic flatmate, but it was all in vain. As soon as William knocked over even a small drink, he immediately turned into a beast, eager to feed his rage. Helen ran away from home when she was 15. Having barely finished 9 grades, she had no idea what the future held for her. At first, the teenage girl was always waiting for the police or the guardianship service to come for her. But this did not happen. Either her late mother took her escape with understanding, or William simply forbade her to raise the alarm. It wasn't until Helen was successful and firmly on her feet that she made her first attempts to find her mum. But as it turned out, the house where she spent her childhood burned down, and her mother and William moved to another village, where her stepfather was offered some work. Deep down, Helen sincerely doubted that William was capable of working anywhere at all. After all, his drinking problem had completely deprived him of the ability to think straight and account for his actions. She turned on the loud music in the cabin and concentrated on the road. Helen was a responsible driver. She never broke any traffic laws. That couldn't be said for Ethan, who drove like a race car driver. Every now and then he got into some unpleasant situation. He'd wreck one car or the other, and all Helen had to do was pay for his fines and car repairs. The traffic on this section of the motorway was light. Occasionally there were heavy trailers passing by, which raised clouds of dust. At such times she always tried to close the window, so that the cabin would not be filled with the smell of burning. As she passed another truck, Helen gripped the steering wheel tighter when the car shook violently, the screech of tires hitting her ears and making her heart race. Oh God, not this, I thought as the car spun down the empty motorway, out of control. Soon the trunk of a huge oak tree by the side of the road flashed before her eyes. Helen tensed inwardly, waiting for the impact and the airbag to deploy, but it didn't. Because at the very last second she twisted the steering wheel and the SUV bounced on the side of the road, frozen with its bonnet in the bushes. She sat there without moving, listening to the frantic pounding of her heart, realizing that everything was all right. Helen got out and looked round. Here we are, she said tiredly, seeing the flat right front tire. There wasn't a soul around. Somewhere in the distance, a bird screamed, and a light breeze wafted through the crowns of the trees growing on either side of the road. She pulled her mobile phone out of her pocket and waved her hand disappointedly. No signal. Of course, where would it come from? Well, let's see what we can do, she thought as she opened the boot. Helen didn't consider herself a white-collar worker at all, so she quickly pulled out a jack, a tank, keys, and an emergency stop sign. She had experience of changing a wheel, though not very much. Helen remembered how her husband had done it once, so she hoped she could do it. To her dismay, it wasn't that easy. The jack didn't want to be fixed on the uneven ground, and the bolts on the wheel seemed to be one piece with the disc. What the hell is this? Helen exclaimed in frustration, waving her hand and wiping the sweat from her forehead. Not a single car had passed by. Her mood had soured completely. She had waited several months for these negotiations, trying to persuade the stubborn investors to invest in her business. And then recently her husband Ethan informed her that he had managed to persuade the partners to a business agreement. She was surprised at first, thinking that Ethan, as usual, fantasized or tried to joke on a topical issue. But it turned out to be quite serious. He really showed wit and was able to persuade the investors to renegotiate the deal. Helen knelt down, unsuccessfully trying to unscrew the bolts on the wheel without any fear of getting dirty. Then she heard someone's creeping footsteps behind her. Her heart raced like a hunted rabbit. Clutching the can wrench tighter in her hand, Helen turned round and saw a man in his 30s, wearing a worn jacket and carrying a rucksack over his shoulders that looked more like a shoulder bag. "Can I help you?" the stranger asked with a slight irony, even though the man wasn't smiling as he spoke. Helen immediately noticed the sly sparkle in his dark eyes. "I've got a flat tire," the businesswoman replied, trying to hide her inner anxiety. In such a situation, meeting a stranger, and even such an unusual one, did not bode well. "Yes, I can see that," the stranger nodded. "So do you want me to help you or what?" Helen thought for a moment, wondering whether to accept help or not. To tell the truth, he looked a lot like one of those hitchhiking vagabonds who travel the vast expanses of our country. "You needn't worry," Helen hastened to refuse. "I'll do it myself." The man grinned. "Oh, come on. I can see you're no good at it. I used to work in a car repair shop, so I know what I'm doing." Helen hesitated for a moment, then accepted the help. What else could she do when she had no choice anyway? "Thank you," she said, handing him the cylinder spanner. "My name is Helen." "I'm James," the man introduced himself, and in no time at all he had the jack in place. While he changed the wheel, Helen watched from the sidelines, trying to appear calm. She couldn't help but notice James's strong hands and quick, confident movements. Whoever this tramp was, he obviously knew what he was doing. "You're not from around here, are you?" Helen asked cautiously, trying to lighten the mood. Yes, I am. I'm really from out of town, James answered, still working. I'm traveling in search of a better life, hitchhiking, so to speak. Amazing, Helen said. Traveling then? James grinned. Well, yes, it's more interesting. New places, new people, starting from scratch every time. And how do you like it? Helen asked, starting to calm down. James fiddled with the wheel for a moment, then said, It does. Like meeting you, for example. James gave her such an open smile that Helen felt her cheeks blush. So much for the tramp, a gallant fellow, she thought. But she didn't say it out loud, of course. It's done. We're good to go, James announced, wiping his hands with the cloth Helen had offered him. Thank you. Why don't I bring you back? You have to go into town, don't you? Thanking him for his help, Helen asked him. James stared at his new acquaintance, then said, Well, if that's the case, I won't refuse. Only if it's not too much trouble. And on the way, of course. Have a seat, Helen assured the tramp and opened the car door. When James sat down in the front seat, she noticed the thin silk cord around his neck. On it, to the businesswoman's great amazement, hung a silver pendant in the shape of a small sun. What a beautiful piece of jewelry. A talisman, I suppose, Helen asked and switched on the ignition. You could say that. My grandmother gave it to me, and they say it protects me from evil spirits and evil people. Helen grinned. And what? You really believe in such things? She hadn't even noticed that she'd switched to you when she asked that question. James shook his head as he watched the car pull smoothly onto the motorway. I don't know, but God blesses the best. That's what they say, isn't it? That's right, she nodded, not pursuing the awkward topic. They drove in silence for a while, each absorbed in his own thoughts. Helen still couldn't believe that not so long ago she had been alone on this deserted road with a flat tire and despair in her eyes. And now there was a strange man sitting on her right hand, next to whom she felt completely calm and confident. What do you do in life? Do you work, or are you a free artist? Helen asked. Nothing much. I work part-time here and there. I write poetry and music. But that's just for myself. Poems? Really? She was surprised. James smiled. Of course, seriously. I even have a recording on my phone. Do you want me to show it to you? James said. I'd love to hear it, Helen said happily. James started rummaging through his rucksack, then pulled out an old smartphone. It did indeed have a recording of him playing at the town playground for anyone who wanted to play, accepting a small fee as a reward. In the video, the melody was pouring out from under the vagrant's fingers, involuntarily filling the car interior with some magical atmosphere. Without taking her eyes off the road, Helen listened with bated breath, amazed by the beauty and depth of the piece. There was something that touched her soul and brought a sweet smile to her lips. James sang so heartfelt that none of the passers-by could pass by without throwing him at least a few even small coins. Did you write this yourself? Helen asked in surprise when James switched off the tape. Well? The tramp replied, embarrassed, and put the phone away in his rucksack. It's just incredible. You've got talent, Helen exclaimed, not hiding her admiration. Thank you, of course. But I don't think so, he replied. Soon the town came into view. It was past noon, and it was quite hot outside. Where do you want to go anyway? Helen asked. I don't really care. I'm probably going to the center, James said. Helen thought for a moment. Frankly, she didn't feel like saying goodbye right now. Nonsense. What's your husband, your business negotiations? You're admiring some tramp's song, she thought embarrassedly, and resolutely dropped James off where he'd asked. In parting, the tramp said that if I wanted to, I could find him in the town square where he was going to give a performance. Where will you get the instrument? Helen asked in surprise. James smiled. I have an acquaintance who lives here. He invited me, in fact. So he'll lend me his guitar. He has a good one, expertly tuned. Helen smiled and wished him luck in all his endeavors. After all, it was not every day that you met such a good man who came to your aid in a difficult moment. But there was no time to relax. Negotiations with investors were ahead, who were known for sabotaging their partners every time. Surprisingly, the meeting was scheduled in the suburbs. Their weird Helen thought irritably. Why not the usual restaurant? Why did she now have to go to the other side of town? She called Ethan back. He said that he was already there and even had time to discuss something. Oh, Ethan, always in a hurry to get somewhere. Then not in time. Helen shook her head. I told you not to start without me. On the edge of the city, in the forest belt, hidden from the eyes of curious inhabitants of the village, lurked a cozy country house. It was surrounded on three sides by tall pines and lush shrubs. When Helen pulled into the car park and got out of the car, the sweet smell of freshly cut grass wafted through the air. Her husband came out to greet her. So are you in a fighting mood? Ethan asked with a smile, glancing at his wife. Yes, I think everything will go according to plan. I'm just a little nervous, Helen admitted, fixing her hair. Her husband nodded, knowing full well how important this meeting was to her. After all, she had been working on this project for months, and success depended on whether the investors were interested or not. It's all about being yourself. You know exactly what you're talking about. Ethan tried to support her. Helen smiled and raised her chin. Near the house there was a picturesque lake, the surface of which sparkled in the sun. At that moment, Helen suddenly noticed something she hadn't noticed before. How strange that the investors had chosen this very place for the meeting. Usually negotiations take place in cozy, air-conditioned offices. This is a walk for the soul, she thought. Already on the steps, two men representatives of a tourist group came out to meet them. In the sunlight, the house looked so unobtrusive and homely and cozy. Helen even felt as if she were at a family dinner rather than a business meeting. The people waiting for her were dressed in a homely way, as if they had called a good friend to visit. But Helen herself still felt a sense of danger. Something in their glances seemed strange and alarming to her. And she remembered the words of the little fortune teller who had warned Helen not to go where she was going. It was true, Helen thought uneasily, realizing that Emily was not so simple. But it was too late to play the situation back. Hello, Helen. My name is Michael. Good to see you, said one of the investors and extended his hand to her first. You know, we've heard a lot about your project. Thank you, Michael. It's good to see you too, she answered readily, trying not to show her excitement by any movement. I hope we'll have a productive day today. The atmosphere in the house was calm, and Helen began to relax. Could you tell me a little more about your project? Michael asked, sitting across the table from her. At that, the man's eyes flashed with a mysterious gleam. Helen took out a clipboard from her briefcase, which contained the slides of the presentation. Immediately, she excitedly began to talk about her startup related to organic products. In her opinion, the interest of investors meant that the dream had a chance to be realized. Ethan sat next to her, listening with interest and nodding at her every word. That's great. You know, I like the fact that you want to do something important, said Michael. Tell me, do you have a good team to lean on? Michael exclaimed excitedly. Helen looked at her husband in surprise and replied confidently. Yes, we have an experienced, close-knit team. Everyone is actively involved in the development. A few more questions followed. Of course, investors were interested in the potential benefits of the business. It is clear that putting your money into someone else's project is a risky and sometimes thankless business. At some point, watching the reactions of the participants in the conversation, Helen suddenly noticed that they were communicating with each other using imperceptible gestures and glances. It all seemed to her strange, unnatural. This is what happens when a person comes to the theater for the first time to the premiere of non-professional actors and sees that in some places they are clearly overplayed. Taking advantage of a small pause, Ethan got up from the table. Helen, do you want to rest a little or have a drink? Let me get you some water, he said. From her husband's voice, she immediately understood that he was trying to help her to diffuse the situation. Thank you, Ethan. I wouldn't mind a glass of mineral water without gas right now, Helen answered. Ethan nodded and went to the kitchen. While he was gone, Helen continued to communicate with the investors. Now she knew for sure that the business partners were smiling smugly at each other. It was as if they knew something that had no connection to the conversation itself. To distract herself a little, Helen took a notebook in her hands and wrote down a few particularly important points of the conversation. Soon Ethan returned with a glass of cool water in his hands. A sip of the cooling liquid had a beneficial and calming effect on Helen. But after a minute, she felt a slight dizziness that made her bite her lip painfully to keep from losing her senses. In a moment, the sensation changed abruptly. Helen felt a strong wave of fatigue come over her, as if someone had pressed a slow-motion button, and everything around her slowed down dramatically. "Helen, are you all right?" Somewhere in the distance, her husband asked. She tried to answer, but instead all that came out of her lips was an unintelligible mumble. The visuals blurred, and before the woman could realize what was happening, she was in a state of serenity. Helen tried to regroup, but it was too late. Her body felt as if it had become leaden, and her head was stripped of the remnants of reason and thought. The last thing she heard was, "Well, I told you it would work, and you doubted it." And the most hurtful thing was that those words were spoken by none other than Ethan, who should be pursuing the interests of the family, not his own. Fortunately, she didn't know that when she passed out, her husband looked triumphantly at the conspirators and said, "Yes, it was certainly difficult to play out that scene. Oh, well, what you don't do for your pocketbook. So where are your papers? Go ahead and sign them. It's a done deal." Michael looked at Ethan in surprise. "Listen, will the police be able to get to us? What are you going to tell them? But where's your wife gone? And why are you in charge of all the businesses? I don't want any trouble, you know." Ethan grinned. "Oh, don't worry. Everything will be done in the best way. I have a good notary team who will do everything, so there will be no problems. It'll be backdated." So Helen had supposedly signed over her company to me a few days before the meeting. Michael nodded approvingly and immediately gave Ethan the papers to sign. In essence, the investors were happy with everything. He hadn't actually contributed any money to Helen's company. He was going to raid the company, for which he was paying Ethan a hefty payoff. Mrs. Helen Priestley, on the other hand, had an unenviable fate. Frankly, her husband hadn't quite worked out what to do. Let her disappear from the business world altogether. I don't know where she'd gone to look for her missing mother's grave. She went somewhere and disappeared in the middle of nowhere. Ethan thought and smiled involuntarily. Not many people had such lucky thoughts. After all, he had been going to take over his wife's business for a long time. There had never been a good opportunity. And only when Helen decided to go to a remote village to visit a grave, he realized this was his chance. After all, it was Ethan who insisted that the wife went on this trip alone. "Why do you need someone else? Maybe you want to be alone with your mother, to cry or something else," he said so convincingly that Helen had to admit the rightness of his words. If only she could have learnt what a mistake she had made in listening to her husband. But it was all in the past, and it was useless to be upset about it. Having signed the necessary documents, Ethan asked Michael's assistants to help him wrap Helen's body in the rug, lying on the floor, and take it to the car. The crook's plan was simple: to take the physical evidence to the dump or dump it in the river, in which case it would even give him an alibi. But there is little doubt that his wife was doing on the riverbank, suddenly decided to swim, but did not calculate her own strength. Ethan had plenty of excuses for that. Loading the rug with Helen's body on the back seat, Ethan decided to go to the river. It was getting towards evening, so there wouldn't be many people there. He had already looked for an interesting place, where there were hardly any fishermen. And at the same time, in the rays of sunset, when the sky was colored in bright orange tones, James called his friend Sam and found out that he was waiting for him in a secluded place on the riverbank, where they played, bathed, and burned fires all night long. When the traveler finally reached the place, Sam was already waiting for him, sitting on a tree covered with stones, with his head covered. He was playing his guitar, immersed in the melody in the world of dreams. The wind was ruffling his long hair, and an old denim jacket was thrown over his shoulders. "Great. How did you get here?" Sam shouted as he saw his mate approach. "Hi, Sam." "All right." Comfortable and breezy, James replied with a smile. Sam nodded and gave his mate a seat in the tree. They had been friends since childhood, and together they dreamed of becoming famous musicians someday. "Listen, do you remember the first time we played around the campfire on this beach?" Sam asked and handed over the guitar. James smiled. "Yes, it was unforgettable." "How old were we then? 15? 16? We lit a fire and sang until morning. And then, remember we went swimming in the river? Oh, those were wonderful times." Sam put a firm hand on his friend's shoulder. "Well, what's stopping us from doing it again? We've got a fire, we've got a river. What else do we need?" James nodded in agreement. Then he offered to gather kindling for the fire. It was getting dark, and a slight chill let them know that night was coming soon. When they lit the fire, the shore was even more beautiful. James picked up his guitar, and soon a melody was playing, filling the whole place. The friends improvised, composing new compositions on the fly and laughing as they recalled old musical tricks. Time flew by, and soon darkness finally fell over the shore. Sam took out some sandwiches from his rucksack and gave them to his friend. The fresh evening air brought the scent of nature, creating a unique atmosphere of calmness for the two friends. "You know, sometimes I think that none of this makes sense. You and I are always traveling. Maybe we should think about something more stable, more permanent," James said, looking at the burning fire. Sam shrugged. "I don't know. I like music. Music is freedom. We're prisoners of it." James nodded and continued to play. The time was passing when suddenly there was the sound of a car approaching. The friends looked round, still not sure what was going on. Usually there was no one in this place, as it was not suitable for swimming or children's play. "Did you hear that too?" James asked, pointing down the road. Sam nodded. "Yeah, something weird. I'm going to go take a look." Sam got to his feet and stomped around to get his blood flowing. James got up too, though the urge to stay by the fire was stronger than curiosity. When Sam got to the road, James remained standing by the fire, wondering what to do next. But when he heard his friend's excited whisper, he felt uneasy. "You won't believe it. There's a man with a rug, about to throw it into the river," Sam whispered. James looked at his friend in bewilderment. "What man with a rug? Why, are you too lazy to carry it to the rubbish dump?" The friends took a quick step towards the road. By the river stood a foreign-made car, next to which there was indeed a stranger holding a huge carpet in his hands. The stranger's face was hidden by the hood of a warm jacket, which made him look like a ghost from a horror film. "Hey mate, what are you doing here?" Sam broke the silence. The owner of the car flinched and almost dropped the knife from his hands. Then he turned round and met the eyes of his friends who were staring at him. "Get out of here. None of your business," he muttered. But James had already taken a step forward, intent on finding out what was going on. "What's that in your hands? What are you doing?" he shouted at the stranger. At the same moment, the man dropped the rug on the ground and rushed towards the car. The friends froze with astonishment. The carpet rolled smoothly down the bank, and soon they saw the hair and the outline of the face of a woman who was lying on the ground, with her arms spread out in different directions. "My God, the woman! What's going on here?" Sam exclaimed and rushed to help. James didn't hesitate either and rushed after his friend. At the same time, the driver, who was sitting behind the wheel, roared his engine and sped off like an arrow. "James! She's not breathing!" Sam exclaimed, leaning over the woman. Her lips were blue, and her face looked pale and unnatural, as if molded from wax. "We need to call an ambulance. James." "Sam." James shouted longingly, remembering that the battery on his old phone was dead. Sam rushed to fulfill his friend's request. James leaned over the woman and froze in amazement. Helen was lying in front of him, the same woman who had picked him up hitchhiking on the motorway today. James's hands trembled, sweat broke out on his forehead. "You see, we can't delay," he thought, and started CPR and indirect cardiac massage. Sweat streamed down James's face, but there was still no result from his actions. "Come on, hold on, don't give up," he repeated over and over. It went on for a few minutes that seemed like an eternity to James. Then the woman suddenly coughed. Helen struggled to open her eyes. "Thank God she's alive," Sam exclaimed, and looked down at the road in relief, waiting for the paramedics to arrive. "James, is that you?" Helen whispered and passed out again. James immediately felt her pulse and realized that she was alive, even though she was unconscious. A little later, the intensive care team arrived and immediately put Helen on a stretcher. The intensive care doctor shook his head as he listened to her confused story. It was the first time in his practice that some vagrant had saved a person's life, acting as well as professional doctors. As it turned out, James had wandered around the cities before. Once he attended a few free courses where everyone was taught to provide first aid. Deep down, he never thought that someday it could be useful in his life. He attended these courses just for the fact that they paid a small fee and provided a cup of soup and a glass of hot tea. Serious motivation, especially considering he didn't have a cent. And hunger, as we know, is not a bad thing. As the ambulance drove away, Sam and James exhaled and sank tiredly against a fallen tree. They didn't feel like playing guitar, and they didn't feel like talking about the past either. After all, it wasn't every day that you could snatch from the clutches of death a man whose life hung in the balance and so much depended on your actions. "Well done, James. I didn't expect you to bring her to her senses so quickly," Sam said respectfully. But his mate just waved his hand and then leaned against a tree for a nap, waiting for new adventures and adrenaline rush. And that night passed. The morning came cloudy but warm, giving hope that by lunchtime the sun would come out and once again please the inhabitants of the city with its gentle rays. Helen slowly opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was the bright light shining through the windows of the hospital room. Resuscitation, I guess, otherwise why then is there so much medical equipment of all sorts around me? There was a sepulchral silence, broken only by the monotonous beeping of medical devices. "How did I get here? Where am I?" Helen whispered, realizing she couldn't even hear the sound of her own voice. There was a low whisper and the sound of footsteps. She turned her head with difficulty and saw a woman in her 40s, dressed in an off-white medical coat. "You're in the hospital. You're going to be all right. I'm a nurse. My name is Cynthia. How are you feeling?" she asked. Helen tried to concentrate, but the pain in her head made her close her eyes again. In the same instant, some of the events that had preceded her awakening were recalled. The images in her memory were changing so quickly and chaotically that she couldn't get a grip on any of them. But then the speed of the changing images slowed. Helen saw her husband clearly in her mind's eye, and his cold gaze, full of grim determination. "My husband, where is he?" she whispered softly. Cynthia shrugged her shoulders. "But we haven't contacted him yet. Don't worry about that. The important thing is that you are safe here." "Safe? He wanted to poison me," Helen whispered with difficulty. Cynthia looked at her patient in surprise. Was she delirious? What is she talking about? "But you don't remember anything. 2 tramps found you unconscious on the riverbank," the nurse said, putting her hand to her forehead to check her temperature. There was, of course, a thermometer for that purpose, but Cynthia did it more automatically than consciously. Squeezing her fingers to the point of pain, Helen tried to piece together the disparate details in her memory. Here she was, along with Ethan, sitting in a business negotiation. Then Michael offers to show her a presentation of the project, and then a glass of water is in her hands, which she drinks, and a minute later darkness. After being quiet for a while, Helen looks pleadingly at Cynthia and asks her to call the police. At first, Nurse Cynthia was reluctant to do so, thinking that Helen's patient was delirious, in a state far from adequate. But when Helen repeated her request and even gave the number of a private investigator she knew, Cynthia gave in. What happened next, Helen no longer remembered, with difficulty explaining to the police officers what had happened. She fell back into a sweet sleep. Only now in her dreams she no longer saw her husband's eyes burning with anger, but enjoyed the kind smile of Emily's girl and the tramp James, whom she picked up on the side of the motorway. That same day her husband was arrested. Ethan's astonishment was so genuine that the scoundrel immediately began to shout that there had been a mistake, and he had nothing to do with all that had happened. The testimony given by Helen was enough to have all those involved in the case detained as soon as possible. She spent a total of about a fortnight in hospital. During this time, James came to the clinic several times, but for some reason he was afraid to enter, deep down, as if he felt guilty about what had happened. Finally, tired of languishing in the unknown, James made up his mind, took his old guitar with him, and cautiously entered the hospital, asking the nurse for directions to Mrs. Helen Priestley's room. He lowered his eyes in embarrassment. "Who are you going to be?" the nurse on duty asked, writing something down in a register. "A friend," James replied quietly. The nurse looked at him with undisguised irritation, but said nothing, just nodded her head towards the stairs. James walked up to the ward and knocked timidly. By now, Helen had been transferred from intensive care to therapy and was lying on a bed by the window, still pale and weak. From the outside, it looked like she was asleep. Hearing a noise, she opened the door. Helen opened her eyes and saw James. A happy smile immediately lit up her face. "It's you," she said. "Well, yes, I just came to check on you," James answered and walked hesitantly into the room. "I've been waiting for you. I wondered why you hadn't come." "I thought you'd forgotten all about me," Helen said regretfully. James hesitated, not knowing how to explain his hesitation. "I didn't want to disturb you." "Oh, nonsense. I'm, bored here alone. Tell me, how are you doing? How's the music business?" Helen changed the subject. James visibly perked up and told her that he and Sam were playing at the railway station and in the town square, and people are enjoying their new pieces. "Could you sing me one song, please?" but only softly, Helen begged. James hesitated for a moment. Then he took out his guitar, sat down on a chair beside the bed, and began to tune the instrument. "James, I'm so glad I met you on the motorway. You're such a good guy. I guess I'm just confused about life," Helen said, looking at him with a warm gaze. James was embarrassed and began to play. His fingers skimmed over the strings, drawing out a melody of sadness and unfulfilled hope from the guitar. He sang about his life, his love of freedom, his longing for the home he never had. Helen listened with her eyes closed. At that moment, her face expressed calmness and peace. James's music touched her to the core, awakening the lightest feelings. When he finished singing, he suddenly opened his eyes and saw that people in white coats were standing in the room, listening to him attentively. "I'm sorry, I was so engrossed that I didn't notice you coming in," he mumbled, apologizing and getting up from his chair. "That's all right, young man," said a woman with glasses, standing in the front row. "You have a very beautiful voice, and the song is so touching. Are you a musician?" "No, not at all. It's just from my soul," James blushed. "Oh, really? You have real talent," she smiled. Then everyone in the room applauded softly, bringing a cute smile to James's face. A couple of days later, James arrived at Helen's discharge holding a bouquet of white roses bought with his own money. Today, no one talked about the fact that his brother had come to visit the patient. Back then, no one even suspected that Helen and James had left the hospital as a couple. By that time, Ethan was awaiting the verdict of the court, and Helen, using all her connections, managed to divorce him. After consulting with James, she returned to the remote village by the river to pay her respects to Emily in gratitude to the little fortune teller. Only there was not the most pleasant news waiting for Helen. As it turned out, Matthew's grandfather died a week ago, and Emily was taken away to a special boarding school, having decided that she had a mental disorder caused by an obsession with fortune-telling and witchcraft. No one could believe that the little girl really had a gift. Nonsense, she grew up with an old man, and he already had dementia. So he taught his granddaughter all sorts of rubbish, said the Board of Guardians. And only Helen knew that this was not true. After all, with her own experience, she was convinced of the rightness of the words of the little seer. In turn, Helen did her best to get custody of Emily. At first, no one wanted to meet with a rich woman who decided out of the blue to become a mother. But Helen knew she'd get her way. She would save the little girl, before the staff of the orphanage finally put her in the cohort of children with developmental disabilities. She had to use all her connections in the legal world before the smiling Emily finally crossed the threshold of her house. As it turned out, the little fortune teller knew everything ahead of time. And when she gave Helen advice, she saw the future and what would one day end up in her home. Subsequently, street musicians James and Sam even recorded a song about this case, which at the request of their few fans played on the local radio. The effect of the song was so powerful that one morning the young men woke up famous. And only Emily smiled meaningfully, looking at her mom and dad, whose names were Helen and James. "There's more to come, dear parents," she said. And Helen was also sure her mom had forgiven her and was looking down from heaven and blessing her with good deeds. She made a wish at that moment that if she got pregnant with a girl, she would name her after her mom. A billionaire bequeathed his daughter to a village shepherd, and when the major stepped into the role of bride B4. The man was lying face down in a snowdrift. Apparently, the snow had saved him from death by softening the blow. However, he had been lying there for quite some time. Peter held up his smartphone like a mirror, and it was slightly misted with breath. The guy was alive. He carefully turned the injured man over and checked for any visible fractures, pulled him up to the path. There was a horse standing there, breathing thickly of steam, and Peter decided to use its help. The injured man's face was pale from the cold, steamed and covered with snow. After some light massage and movements with the limbs, breathing was restored. The blood flow, slowed by hypothermia, was gaining strength. The man breathed more deeply. His pulse had evened out. He tried to get up, shouted something, but there was no strength, and he collapsed back into the snow. Having ascertained that the injured man was relatively safe, and having applied all his knowledge, Peter decided to carry the man to the village. He made a sort of drag from sticks, brought them to the horse on either side, laid a blanket on top, dragged the injured man into it, covered him with his fur waistcoat, and set off. The horse walked slowly and steadily, picking his way around rocks and holes, maneuvering between the bushes. Peter walked beside him and watched his charge. He groaned softly, but on the whole he was alive, and seemingly unharmed. Peter brought the stranger back to his house. The house was cool, which is important for someone who has spent a long time in the cold. Laying him down on the sofa in the living room, he ran to fetch Anne. That's what she was affectionately called in the village, a paramedic with years of experience. She treated everyone and was ready to help without fail at any time of the day. And her husband, a golden man, understanding her mission in life, always drove her by his tractor or car. They would go out in blizzards and snowstorms to rescue people. Mrs. Ann examined the patient and noticed that Peter had done everything right. She sent out to heat the cookers, to warm water for tea with herbs, honey, raspberries, any warming drink. An external examination showed no fractures or serious injuries, just hypothermia and possibly concussion. "Now hot tea and rest, and tomorrow we'll see," said Mrs. Ann. A couple of days later, the regional radiology team arrived, raiding remote villages and hamlets. They took a couple of scans on the new patient. It turned out that there were no fractures or cracks. The surgeon and the brigade advised rest, good nutrition, and observation. Meanwhile, the traveler in Peter's house was visited by a district officer. And since the man did catch bronchitis and lay with fever, he could not give any explanations. He had no documents with him. Peter, strictly following instructions, treated his guest. The whole village was worried about the sick man and came to check on him. They brought food, herbs, and honey. When Peter got tired of greeting and seeing everyone off, he decided to post news in a local chat room on one of the social networks where everyone was subscribed. In the 3 weeks that the sick man had been laid up with severe bronchitis, spring had melted the snow, lured birds from the south, and the nearby hills and mountains shone with fine young grass. Everything was getting better. Soon the village herd would begin to gather, and then Peter would have no time to stay at home. The sick man was getting better. But the trouble was, he couldn't remember anything. Where did he come from? And what was he doing in these faraway places? In the fresh air and with homemade food, the sick man got better. But the memory was in no hurry to return. With the district officers searched in the bulletins of accidents and missing persons, but found nothing. They decided to give him more time and then look for relatives through social networks. Peter's lodger wasn't worried about anything. He fit into the village life very organically. He got up early, helped his master as much as he could, and to the best of his ability started to ask him to graze the herd. Peter did not seem to mind the help of the stranger, and the doctor advised more physical labor and fresh air. So Peter began to take the guest with him. At dawn, they both followed the herd through the dewy grass. At the edge of the village, there was a large mug of milk and a piece of bread on a table. It was a shepherd's tradition to have breakfast before herding the flock. For the first couple of days, Peter shared honestly with his grandfather, so he was nicknamed for his pliant beard, for no one knew his name, and after drinking half of the mug, gave it to his partner. Accordingly, the bread was shared equally. The partner liked it. He kept silent, but it was obvious that he wanted to talk. But whether his memory failed him or he lacked the right words, he kept silent. The villagers realized that Peter went to graze the local herd with his guest. They put 2 mugs and 2 loaves of bread. They empathized with the man who had lost his memory, and things were slowly going on. The herd increased, youngsters arrived, sheep and goats were brought in. And this traveler was happy to follow the herd. Apparently, he realized that it was more fun together. The grandfather, who had been answering questions one syllable until now, suddenly burst into speech one morning. How well you live. I feel that I have never had such freedom before. Now every cell of my body sings from the free air, but something's weighing me down. Do you know where I'm from? Peter raised his eyebrows in surprise and grinned. Well, if you did, you'd have sent me home a long time ago. You're not a burden to me, but I don't need to worry about you. I'm a free man. True, it's time to think about a family, but the local girls aren't in a hurry to marry their shepherds. They're running off to the city. Who wants to milk cows? Peter laughed at his own words. He spurred his horse and turned a little to the left to a meadow where they had not been for a long time. Yes, it's a beautiful place, of course. And that's why I, who had traveled many places in my turbulent youth, appreciate them very much. Pristine, pure nature dawns at the foot of the mountain. Sunsets with the sun falling behind their stone backs, green hillsides, foothills and steeps that make your heart stop. Everything here is sweet and native. No, I don't regret the years I spent away from these places. Apparently they were necessary to realize the depth of love for my homeland. And now it's here. And it's forever. So the girls looked back at the young man, but realizing that he wasn't going anywhere, they gave up their advances. So he was alone. You seem like a good-looking guy. Why don't they go? Do they want to go to town so badly? Why don't you want to go? It's a long story, but I've traveled abroad. Now my life here is mountains, forests, rivers, and dizzying air. But girls want a richer life, a cozier life. They watch various serials and shows where they only talk about the rich. But ordinary people, what's interesting about us? So they are eager to see the world and to stay with some rich man. And then they make a nest. Yes, you're right, said the lodger. A lot of this junk is shown everywhere, and on the telephone, wherever you point your finger. He looked in his pocket. Finding nothing, he continued in surprise, where's my phone? Look, I remembered something. Peter was genuinely pleased. You'll remember who you are and where you came from. But the flashed thought disappeared quickly, leaving no hint of memory. And the stranger again fumbled in his pocket, trying to remember. What's on the phone? The herd turned round behind Peanut waddlingly and slowly. The grass here is good, tender. The cows were happy. It means that they will graze for a long time. We can rest in the shade. Peanut. It's nice here, continued the guest. I have never paid attention to beauty before. You live in paradise here and don't appreciate it. I didn't mean you. The man apologized immediately and continued. You seem to understand. It's the girls who are suffering from misunderstanding. This is the place to give birth to children and raise them. I see that you are not so young, about 30 years old. To be more exact, 32 already, answered the shepherd, and having folded the whip, put it in his boot. I want the warmth of home, but I can't do it among my own people. The young are trying to leave. Those who are left are looking for the well-to-do. And I'm afraid. No, women are good and they know how to approach us men. They understand what they want. But children are such a responsibility for their own, and what to say about strangers, to recognize them as relatives. The young man fell silent. He didn't really love. That's why he had such questions in his head. Love reconciles everything and children become relatives, and difficulties are nothing. Love, in a word. Suddenly burst out the memoryless assistant to Peter. I remember. And stopped. And Peter, realizing that his interlocutor could not think of anything worthwhile except general phrases and feelings, sat down on the grass and, leaning back, looked up at the sky. Why are you silent? Did memory tease you again? Yes, it is insidious and capricious, the guest replied. It would seem that people sometimes dream of forgetting something, but here you suffer that you do not remember. And as for marriage, maybe you should look somewhere else. Isn't there a matchmaker in the village? Maybe somewhere in the city? Matchmakers died out like mammoths in the Jurassic period. Peter laughed out loud. And in the city also, advised me. The locals are fleeing there. And you want your people to come here? Yes, why? To such beauty. The lodger wouldn't stop. Did you see it? Did you have something to compare it with? Do geologists come here in summer? Sometimes, answered the shepherd. But they are special people. Geologists are vagabonds by nature. If they catch the bacillus of traveling, that's it, they can't stay at home. I went to the seas and fell in love. When I came back to shore, I asked her to come with me. And she stayed and said, I won't marry till I've traveled the world, and only to the captain so much for the others. So for now, I'm just dreaming of meeting my soul mate. You're talking about the city. I bet you wouldn't let your daughter go to someone like me. I didn't think of such a thing. The stranger guest scratched his beard and continued the conversation. Listen, do you have it? Do you? You live a poor, holy life. But a good woman always makes a husband. What are you talking about? Picking a blade of grass in his teeth, Peter asked. A wife is a good incentive. When I married mine, I was almost like that too. But I loved passion. And tried to please her, continued the lodger. I started to get ahead and earn money to please her. And when they started talking about children, it became clear that it was time to build a house and have a summer cottage on the sea. So he intensified his efforts. Well, you've got it, said the shepherd. And you say you don't remember anything. Wow. The local beauty in the air had an effect. I'm beginning to remember things. So what are you saying, Peter? The girls don't want to stay here, so you're still single? Yeah, but you're not going to give me your daughter, are you? Why not? If I wanted her to be happy, I would. You're a smart guy. If you turn around a bit, you'll be a respectable groom. And if I had a daughter, I'd give it to you. You saved my life. That's worth a lot these days. Giving her as a gift is too rude. It's not a thing. Bequeathing it, I don't think I'm going anywhere yet either. Let's say I make a condition: if she wants the inheritance, she'll marry you. If she doesn't, she'll marry you, Peter laughed. Well, my friend, like in Norwegian fairy tales, I'll give you what I don't know if I have. Yes? He was having fun. Well, I'll remember, and maybe I'll find it at last, shouted the lodger in his heart. Mr. Smith was searched for. But whether the searchers did not try hard enough, or whether someone deliberately delayed the search and hurried to issue a missing persons report. However, the only one who suffered for the missing man was Kate, his daughter. Though she went out all night long, she howled in the morning, realizing that her father had not returned. And terrible thoughts came over her in a wave. What if her father never came back? She would fall asleep in her bed again in tears and sleep until evening. And in the evening, everything started again: friends, clubs, dancing, drinks, carousel of faces, events, and no headache. Sometimes she remembered her elderly grandparents and went to see them. She was a sweet, obedient granddaughter. That's where she was a comforter. She supported them and promised them that her father would come back. That's one of the few good things about her. Other than that, she had no restraint. After studying at a language university, she never went to work either as a translator or in an office. Her father dreamed of seeing her a successful lady. Kate was in no hurry to get married either. So much for commitment. Love didn't loom on the horizon. Guys from her circle, the same idlers, did not excite her soul. They were drinking buddies with whom you can spend time, but not companions of life. Here she was serious about marriage. Her father wanted to marry her off sooner, and her grandmother was glad that her granddaughter was clad, that her granddaughter was in no hurry to marry anyone, and hoped that the girl would find her happiness. One morning after a noisy party, before going to bed, Kate looked at the phone. A friend sent her a popular video and laughed, saying that your dad looks like a man. The girl flared up, began to dial a number to call and sass her friend. But she decided to see what she saw there first, which surprised her very much. If it wasn't for some thinness, tanned face, and clothes off someone else's shoulder, you could say it was the father. With that conclusion, she went down to the security room. When the video was brought up on the big screen, it became clear that it was Mr. Smith, the head of the family, the owner of a large natural resources firm, had been found. Kate realized with horror that the conditions set by her father were real. He was as serious as ever, as terse, and giving out every thought, he did not labor to explain it, but simply put her on notice. What would happen if she did not honor certain rules? And the conditions were, in her opinion, dreadful. Mr. Smith was going to send his daughter to the village to some shepherd, or rather to the one who had saved him from certain doom and was coming out. Strange. A father was never so sentimental, but to give his own daughter to a villager. And she had to be a bride and fall in love. Otherwise, she'll never have her father's material blessing and carefree life. Yes, it seems that the trauma caused irreparable damage to the mental abilities of Daddy, as she called him in moments of tenderness and trusting dialogue. I can't think of anything like that. Yeah, I'm having fun. But he himself always said that I earn for you and for myself. I've provided for your welfare. His daughter was even offered business a couple of times, but she, having failed once again business, rushed to apologize to her father and went away to restore the nervous system in foreign resorts. And now he suddenly decided to bring her up and set such conditions. You know, daughter, this incident has shown me that nothing lasts forever in this world, and you're a windbag, Mr. Smith said. Offensive, perhaps, but that's the way it is. You flutter about like a bird of the sky and don't think about your daily bread and how to get it. And you must either become self-sufficient or marry well. Your husband will support you without question and manage my capital carefully. How does that sound? Her father frightened the girl. Well, the money is mine, parried the daughter. And how will you know how things are going if you don't understand anything? You'll be told a lot of nonsense and you'll believe it. I can't guarantee that your husband will love you and never betray you. If you become self-sufficient and take responsibility for yourself and your actions, I think you will be able to distinguish truth from lies and take care of yourself. Understand, my daughter, money is a tool to achieve a goal, and you have to learn how to use it. And here the best thing is to work and immerse yourself in your favorite business. And I don't have one, Kate said with a sassy look at her father. Well then look for it, that's all. That's the most I can tell you. You're only confusing yourself with questions and answers. This time if you resist, I'll give you to this nice bloke in my will. You'll be his inheritance. Kate ran out of the office and, frustrated, went to her room. For the first time today, she didn't feel like going to the club, and she didn't answer her phone. Even switched off the phone. Knowing her father's character, she realized he wouldn't back down. He'd always been a man of his word, he said and did. Only Mum, while she was around, could curb his impulses to make unwavering decisions. She hadn't been with them for a long time, and today was clearly not Kate's day. This was serious, and something had to be worked out. By midnight, her head ached from thinking, and the girl still decided to escape to the club and distract herself. Her father hadn't announced a time to go to the village. Avos, it will not be soon, or managed to pretend to be sick and excuse herself for a round-the-world trip. The night was active. 2 clubs and 1 bar. Already at dawn, a race on the dawn motorway. Late morning or almost noon, the girl woke up to sounds and fiddling in the room. Such a thing had never happened before. Noise in the room where she sleeps. Opening her eyes, she saw her father and a couple of maids packing something into suitcases. Okay, she didn't need this. These tracksuits, I think you should put them in, they'll do. And these tattered clothes are useless. Even in summer, it's cool in the evenings. There you need socks, warm stockings or trousers, hats and scarves too. Put everything in the suitcases. Everything will come in handy. Papa said, looking at the cupboards. "Daddy, what's going on here?" Kate asked. "Are you going to the country, my daughter? It's time. The groom is waiting," came the reply. "Daddy, well, why don't I get my nerves back first? Or your savior's going to get a hysterical girl." Kate argued with her father. "Nothing there, in the fresh air, with steamy milk, you'll be as good as new," said Mr. Smith. "You'll get your nerves right in no time with day and night. Believe me, I realized a lot of things there, how much time I wasted in the capital. Now I'll make up for it, and I'll encourage you to adopt a healthy lifestyle." "So I'm a hostage?" inserted the girl. "Who?" the father asked in surprise. "Well, a healthy lifestyle you imagine, Dad," Kate continued. "A proper diet, eh?" "Oh no, darling. A fridge full of yogurts and chicken breasts is not a healthy lifestyle." "What was it you said?" Mr. Smith interjected. "Hostage," repeated the girl. "And not imagined, exactly. Drinking, smoking, staying up all night is not a healthy lifestyle. Here, my dear, you need a systematic approach. That's where you'll try it. All the questions and answers are in the contract. You have to honor it, and then everything of mine becomes yours. Then I'll be able to do things for myself and my soul without distractions from packing my suitcases," said the father to his daughter. "You don't need those dresses." Dad pointed his finger. "It's Dior and Armani." Kate jumped out of bed and snatched the things, almost shrieking. "There's nowhere to go in it. And by the time you get back, believe me, you won't want to wear them yourself." But the girl begged, and her father allowed her to take the dress with her. "All right, let's get ready. We'll have breakfast, and then we'll go to Peter's to meet him. It's a long drive." "Yeah." "Can you bring something of your favorite? How much room do you have left in those 2 suitcases? Take comfortable, practical shoes, too. And you, make sure the shoes are comfortable and practical. I repeat, those stiletto heels you're wearing are no good. What's wrong with them?" Kate asked playfully, her eyes rounded. "You can't go far off-road in them. You're going barefoot from here. All right, pack up and I'll meet you downstairs." Everything fell apart in an instant. The trip came suddenly and quickly. "Should I run away?" Kate thought and looked out the window. Putting her things away, she said quietly, "There are guards outside the window. Daddy saw it coming and put guards outside. What a sly man." But she was her father's daughter. She never gave up and looked for a way out. Now she was wondering what to do. A hunch lit up her face. Bingo. She should call her grandmother. She'd find a solution for her son. But the phone was nowhere to be found. The maid said Mr. Smith had taken it. And just like that, the life of a simple city girl, as Kate thought she was changing before her eyes. Her father's fate was about to throw her into the middle of nowhere. Kate's gut resisted. She was still looking for ways to avoid the trip. When all the obstacle options didn't work, Kate decided she would try to change things on the spot. Perhaps she could avoid the arrangements by giving money. It was worth a try, and little else could happen. Playing the dutiful daughter, she ate breakfast, clarified some more details, and left to prepare for departure. It was a long journey car, plain car again, about 3 hours deep into the mountains. Peter, as Kate had imagined, was a plainly dressed young man, tall and well-fed. Curious brown eyes peered out from under his wheat hair. Is this the candidate her father sees her with? Trying the man on like a new dress on herself, the girl was clearly not pleased. Peter held out his hand, and Kate extended hers, and was surprised by the young man's answer. "Let's have the suitcases." It seemed to her that he wanted to kiss her hand. Here, at the pass, far from the big city, the girl and her father moved into a simple Neva. It could provide them with a way to a distant, lost on the edge of the valley village. Of course, there was no comfort in the car. All right, Kate consoled herself. Not in a carriage, that was good enough. After driving up an inconspicuous road and overcoming the highest point of the pass, the men came to a small area, and her father asked her to stop. "Come on, let's see what a paradisiacal place I have brought you to. Look around you, daughter. See if you can discover the beauty," said Mr. Smith. and the view was indeed marvelous. Standing almost at the top of a small ridge of pine and fir trees, Kate looked round. A little way up behind her father on level ground, she saw the magnificent scenery. They stood at the very edge of the valley. Further up, the mountains ended in a small ridge of hills, or hills as they were called here. Farther away was a solid green plain. And somewhere there, on the very edge where the mountains give way to the plain, there was a small village. It was early morning and the sun was already shining on the edge of the horizon. It had come out from under the earth and was hurrying to flood the land with its golden light. Jets of smoke were rising from the houses. They must be heating the cookers, thought the girl. It was summer, though. And her father had already answered her mental question. It is summer, but the climate here is still northern, cool and damp at night. That's why the villagers heat their houses. That's right, Grandpa Matthew heats to keep the house warm and dry. And a lot of people are still baking bread. We'll be just in time for fresh slices. Peter summarized the brief conversation. Who is it that's hurting your friends today? Mr. Smith asked. Yes, I've got a trainee now. Matthew's ill, so he sent his nephew in his place. He's a bright lad, quick on the uptake. He's been out with my nesting dolls and lambs today. Laughing and smiling broadly, said the shepherd. Well, it's time. Let's go. We went down the serpentine down to the village. The road turned sharply, then ran deep into the forest and seemed to lead to quite different places. But then, when they came to their senses, it looped again, looking for a convenient descent for the car. Here was the village a few streets. Nice flat houses, slightly different in size, but approximately the same style. In front there was a porch with a wooden fence, and then a house and a yard. All have front gardens planted with rose bushes of all colors. It is obvious that flowers are loved in these parts. These were the flowers that limited Kate's knowledge. They grew in her grandmother's flower bed. Mr. Smith was silent and watched his daughter's reaction. He realized that right now she should be left alone with her impressions. Let her not be distracted, and maybe the beauty of the place he loved would help to set his daughter on the right path. And Kate was silent. She looked and marveled that there were still such places far from the tourist routes and not in Switzerland. Kate was a pragmatic person to the core. She understood that it was not worth expressing enthusiasm, it would be points in favor of her father. But it was possible to break a little, not to offend, but not to give a head start. It's cool here. It's beautiful. I guess there is no electricity, and it's in the middle of nowhere, said the girl. Well, we have light, Peter interceded. But we heat everything with wood, that's true. We can't do it any other way. It's expensive to get gas. But everything is civilized. We even have your favorite internet. Tell me you've got a club. Kate, determined to mock the shepherd, said. There is a club, but it's not a nightclub, it's an evening club. And the villagers sing there themselves. And they dance pretty well too. We even have a buffet there. The cinema comes. So there's a cultural front for every taste. There's a library, although you're probably reading books on your phone. Kate's pride awoke and her cheeks flushed. He'd heard her she really hadn't read anything in a long time. But you've got to keep up your brand. And the character's too cool. And what have you read from the last? She wagged and nervously parried. I have no time to read. The young man had no time to finish. No books? But you ask me and you don't read? You misunderstand, Miss Kate. I don't read, but I listen. You know, it's so convenient to do your own thing and listen. I recommend it if you haven't tried it. Peter replied with feeling. Yes, in my youth, by the way, they used to read books on the radio and put on radio plays. Mr. Smith entered the heated dispute between the city, capital and rich, and the intelligent village. And how this dispute would end, Mr. Smith wondered. It was this lively interest that he hoped for as he looked at his daughter. The father hoped that the daughter would not squander her life like so many around them. So he believed that the decision to move her to the village was the right one. On the edge of the last street to the forest stood Peter's house. Of course it was small, judging by the house in which Kate lived, but next to the village looked even very presentable. 2 stories, big windows, and all surrounded by a garden and flowers too. The house itself was quite cozy for village life. Kate had little judgment on the subject. After all, her grandparents, despite their son's wealth, lived modestly and did not want to change their house for a stone palace. They allowed to repair and additions, but they refused to move or build a new house. "We've lived here all our lives. My grandparents lived here. How can I leave my father's house?" my grandfather always said. A quick glance made it clear that the owner was tidy, but a woman's hand was clearly missing. Kate wondered to herself, suddenly discovering new knowledge and understanding. A middle-aged woman of small stature, a little overweight, came in from the courtyard. "Good afternoon, Peter. I've done everything. Breakfast is ready. I've brought hot bread. You're settling in." She said hello and reported back. "Wait a minute, Mary, let's get acquainted. Well, you know your grandfather, and this is his daughter, Miss Kate, who's come to stay, so you'll have more mouths to feed." "Pleased to meet you," replied the woman, and smiling added, "Where there's one, there's two and three. On the contrary, Mr. Peter, it's a good thing we're all on our own. It's time to settle down." And laughing loudly, as if she had touched on a sensitive subject, she hurried away. Father introduced the bride and groom to the terms of the contract and a separate order, written in person. Kate asked to go for a walk, but her father hurried her, saying that he still had business in the neighboring town. It seemed that Dad was going to be away from the business, or maybe he was ill and didn't want to tell her. These reflections softened Kate, and she decided that she would agree and not make her father nervous. She would have to be patient for a while, and then she would see. Kate had always been Daddy's little girl, and it was manifested in stubbornness and persistence. But she'd misdirected those qualities. That's why it was incomprehensible to the father. Why squanders his life-favorite daughter? So the terms. Kate, in her position as a bride, is to settle here and live in the village. And after a year, she was to marry Peter. A year was given for socializing and getting used to it. Her signature on the contract had been secured and certified, which meant there was no turning back. And after a year in this house, she was to be a wife. Yes, it's a strange situation, but on the other hand, let it be an adventure, for I'll decide for myself how it will be anyway. And then the thought of Papa's health came again. It hit her, and the girl decided her fate for the near future with one stroke of a pen on 2 pages. The walk was very pleasant, the village was lovely, and the middle-aged shop provided the necessities. Here came the village club. But here later, when the strength runs out, sitting in the middle of nowhere. That's when we'll go on tour to the clubs, thought the girl. And now she was in a hurry to admire these boundless meadows, the heights of the hills and blue ribbons of streams running away into a small river. Well, all in all, it's pretty, it's a nice place to live. Nowadays, such traveling is paid decently. And here on a tourist product and for free, thought Kate. But sweet Kate didn't know how she was going to have fun here. She didn't know that there were no maids and cooks, no servants and drivers. She'd have to do everything herself. When her father left, after a walk and a hearty breakfast, Kate wanted to sleep. Peter let her go. He wisely decided that he would not rush the girl and dump all the requirements for living together at once. Let her get used to it today and tomorrow, and then it would be seen. Of course, Mr. Smith would like to see results as soon as possible, but Peter could not be blamed for his haste. He, too, was now thinking that he had got into this story for nothing. It had grown from a joking conversation into a venture of which he himself did not much approve. Looking closely at the girl, of course, he noted for himself beautiful, and not bright and flashy, but a hidden beauty. She would always surprise with new facets. Well done for not pumping up her face with fashionable fillers and injections, and from that she was even more feminine. Average height, not thin, and apparently it did not bother her. With a mop of brown hair, freckles, and gray-green eyes, she was certainly a beauty. But as for character, after all, the bully, again her father would always loom behind her back. Teach him how to get rich, and he didn't want to do that. Of course, he wanted to improve his living conditions, but he did not dream of riches. He somehow understood that a lot of money still need to be able to hold and properly manage them. So Mr. Smith's offer was not a tempting gift. Peter, like Kate, hoped that if something went wrong, he would jump out. He didn't need $1 million. In the morning, leaving to graze the herd, Peter left a note saying he'd be back in the evening. After wandering around the house until 6, looking round her room, Kate lay on the sofa in the living room. Then she decided it was time to unload the suitcases. But there were no helpers, and this difficult task she solved by herself. She was tired after 2 hours and went to look for something to eat. It was time to eat. Mary was fussing in the kitchen. Saying hello, she offered fresh vegetables and began to tell. Kate. Let's use the first name. In our village, we all use the first name, old and young. It's not that it's disrespectful, it's more of a recognition that we're all kin. So I'll come round for a couple of days, help with the cooking and the chores. But from now on, you're on your own. So look around and ask what's what. And then who's going to cook? Kate asked, apparently missing the point. How? You will. And know that Peter likes meat and vegetables, all kinds fresh, stewed and roasted, but most of all meat. He's a man. Kate realized there was a problem with that question. And she really doesn't know how to cook anything, although her grandmother had taught her to make scrambled eggs and pancakes. That's what she remembered from her childhood. In the evening, when Peter arrived, she approached him with a conversation. The young man agreed with her that her father's idea was not a good one. It certainly smacked of deceit, and that they, two grown-up people, should not go along with it. Peter even got hot with his conclusions, saying that he should give up everything and not honor the agreement. He had nothing to lose. He only provided shelter and promised to look after him. And marriage is a delicate matter. This conversation made things even more confusing. Kate realized that her father could really disinherit her. He's unpredictable. And that's what sometimes helped him in business. She was also concerned about her father's health. It's all about intuition. She left her doubts behind. Maybe yes, maybe no. To these two important factors came a third. Peter had turned away so easily from her, a high society girl with money, beautiful, intelligent. How so? He should be happy that under the same roof with him will live like the sun in the morning, and feed and water them, and he's reasoning that I'm not exactly what he needs. This fact made the girl very angry. But as Peter agreed with her, she decided to listen to his view of the solution of their question. Peter suggested that, in order not to anger Mr. Smith, to comply with the terms of the contract until better times and look out for options for a solution. And for that, Kate should learn the minimum skills: washing, ironing, sewing, cooking, and cleaning. Find a business to her liking and learn to keep track of expenses and income. Who will the income come from? Kate asked straight away. No one. I'll feed you for the first time, and there will be a bonus for cleaning. And the rest you will earn on your own. All this surprised and made the girl seek privacy and plunge into thought. She took the contract, read it, and fell asleep. Early in the morning, Kate woke up to a rumbling noise and, a little frightened, jumped out of her room. On the ground floor, she saw a startling scene. There were cans and buckets and lids lying around in the kitchen, and standing in the middle of the mess was Peter. Did I wake you? Well, enough of the you. Let's use the country you, he said. Well, I'm going to milk the cow, and I suggest you come with me. It's only dawn. The girl replied angrily. That's when our dairy maids are milked. And then they will go to the herd, to walk, to nibble grass, to get milk. I explained as a little girl, the essence of the matter, said Peter. Do you want me to milk them too? Kate snapped at him. Yes, but you'll learn to milk later. Now learn to approach the cow. You need to find a common language with her too, or she won't give you milk. And she may hit you with her hoof, Peter said, smiling. You'll learn. There is nothing difficult. The main thing is that you need to be willing. The girl, not answering anything, went back into the room. Peter, realizing that she might not come back and go to bed, said to her, You go out and remember the contract. And if you want to get off, go home. Peter went out into the corridor, armed with a couple of buckets, and thought to himself, maybe I'm being too harsh with her. But maybe she didn't hear the last words. It's good for the ego to have such a young person in the house. And apparently the hunter's instinct was awakening beyond his will. Kate, protesting inwardly, dressed and went back into the kitchen. Stepping out into the yard, she headed for the barn. It was time to learn what a country farm was all about. Peter had taken it up by seniority not long ago. On his return, he first repaired the house and looked round for something to do. He had a small capital, and if he managed it wisely, he could provide for himself. While the matter was in hand, a vacancy for a shepherd came up. The work was both hard and free, all day on your feet but in the fresh air, and the local beauty was a bonus to a job to my heart's content. On long treks, traveling farther from the village and staying overnight, he would daydream. At times he was inspired by the stars. He wrote timid lines about the meaning of life, about beauty, and about love. Then the villagers gave him horses. He chose an old horse and became a shepherd. The rider he became more correct and easier. Long walks on horseback were not very soft and comfortable. It was the old horse, then, that helped to pull Mr. Smith out of a snowdrift. Samantha, as Peter called the horse, was loyal and kind. She behaved respectfully. Then Peter got a cow, then another. He sold his milk wholesale to a local farmer. The farm grew. Here to the friendly company of cows and mares was added a restless goat with horns, which she frightened a lot of people. Peter had saved her from the massacre, and now she, grateful, generously shared her healing milk. It was all a woman's realm, and it fell to Kate to oversee it all. Peter told her the story of the women's household within the walls of the barn as he prepared for milking. He told and showed her all the techniques. But Kate looked round idly, yawned, and wished she could finish her lesson and go to bed as soon as possible. The habit of late risings had taken its toll. The first lesson passed quickly, and without waiting for the end of milking, the girl ran away and really went back to her room and went to bed. But she was awakened again by a noise. It was Mary talking loudly, through the open window, to the master of the house. Kate, indignant, ran out and was about to speak rudely to the woman, but when she saw the pile of delicious pancakes, she swallowed her saliva, kept silent, and sat down at the table. "Good morning, Kate," Mary addressed her, turning round. Kate, already chewing, replied with her mouth full. "Good morning. How did you sleep? Peter didn't pick you up early this morning? Let you sleep? You city folk can't get up early," Mary continued. The answers were drowned out by the loud chatter of Peter and the assistant. But Kate was glad, for she suddenly realized that there was no point in complaining, and nothing to praise the coward for. While Mary was around for a couple of days, the girl listened to what to do and how to do it. She enjoyed the conversations, the good food, and the minimal involvement in things. But 3 days later, when Mary didn't show up, Kate's troubles began. Peter was demanding breakfast, or helping milk the cows. Kate was afraid to go near them. On the wall in the kitchen hung a list and even handwriting with items and times to be done. But the clouds were gathering, and if Kate was able to make breakfast twice, she had to milk the cows by 10 a.m., when the owner of the house was already grazing the herd. And then the day came when Peter went to town on business, and today Kate had to deal with the cows and the goat herself, and then drive the horned ones out into the herd. Fortunately, the herd was passing this very road in the morning. Barely rising at the alarm bell, pulling on a warm suit, Kate crept down to the ground floor. Piled in like Peter's on the first day of his introduction to the household, all the milk dishes and buckets and bidons and mugs. With an unsteady gait, she crept out onto the front porch. The cows met her indulgently, kindly waved their heads and looked at the new milkmaid with their huge brown eyes, still not thinking straight. But remembering from which side to sit down to Meg, the girl picked herself up and sat down quietly. The first touch on the udder amused her. Those are big breasts, the nipples were hot and tight. Next, reaching up to the udder, Kate set the bucket down and tried pulling on those long nipples. But she could tell either her hands were cold or she'd taken the wrong grip. Or maybe Meg wasn't in the mood. Finally, the cow kicked the bucket and it flew between her legs to the door. The dream came off, but the fog still remained. Kate went to get the bucket and had already received a good kick in the back and screamed in pain and despair. Then Kate realized that she would not be able to milk the cow. She became afraid to approach her. She tried the second horned lady. It was a little easier with her, but the milk barely flowed, and for half an hour of hard work in the bucket tinkled a mug of milk. Finally disappointed with the milking and avoiding the goat, Kate returned to the house. She decided that Peter would milk the cows himself later, and the groom wouldn't be angry at her ineptitude. Kate decided to make breakfast. But even here she was disappointed. The milk had escaped from the pot. While the girl was looking for cereals, except semolina, she had not yet mastered anything. Then, applying female logic, she decided to bake pancakes. Of course, such puffy and tasty as Mary's she is unlikely to get. But her grandmother's recipe wasn't bad either. Within half an hour of trying to make breakfast, the kitchen, as in my grandmother's childhood, had become a nightmare. The mixer in the kitchen was old, big and buzzing loudly. The flour was found and the eggs were in the fridge. But whether the mode was incorrectly set or the mechanism was defective, only the lid from the cup blew off and the flour was everywhere, and the eggs were scattered in large drops on the walls. Having decided that the situation could be corrected by adding milk, the girl finally spoiled everything. The bowl of the blender overturned, and the liquid dough spilled over the table and floor, got on her hair. Kate suddenly screamed and froze as if petrified. She sat there, smearing the batter on her face, wiping away her tears. She thought that she would be punished for this, because she had lived an ordinary life, according to her, not worse than others. And here she was. Her father decided to re-educate her, sending her to the village to her fiancé to learn to milk cows. What's the point of all this? Bitter tears of helplessness flowed down her cheeks. But the girl still searched for answers to empty questions, for her father's will was law even for her. It was in such a state that Peter, returning from the city, found her. The first impulse was to jump up and ask what happened. But knowing a little about the psychology of women, he knew that it was impossible to show weakness. Now she would realize that impulse and take advantage of his pity, and all would be lost. So after saying hello and pausing, he came closer and asked, "Kate, what's wrong? Did you decide to renovate the kitchen and wallpaper it with pastry?" He laughed again, and Kate was angry that he saw her like that. "Normal appliances are here. The light bulb in the room blinks, the TV doesn't work. The blender can only blend when you're lying down, can it?" "Oh, I can see you're all right if you're joking." "Well, tidy up here and we'll go out tonight and eat there," Peter said as he went out into the yard. And from there, when he heard the cows mooing, he shouted at the beauties at home, "Why aren't they in the herd?" But in a couple of minutes he came back and, barely restraining himself, attacked the girl. "Didn't you milk them? Where's the milk?" "So what if I haven't milked them?" "We'll milk them at lunchtime." "At lunchtime?" The man almost shouted. "Do you realize you have to milk on time? That's what determines how much milk you get. And Tom's coming for milk soon and there's no milk. Do you know how it is when every rubble on the farm counts? And they need to go to the meadows. There's succulent fodder there. You need responsibility, you know. If you take on a job, you have to do it. And anyway, I'm not keeping you here by force. You're free to leave. That's your agreement with your father. I've got nothing to do with him, and I'm not here to babysit or educate you. You're an adult, you decide for yourself. But if you stay here, you'll do as we agreed. Otherwise, here's God and here's the threshold," he said in a heartbeat, and ran out into the yard to the cows. Kate froze in a puddle of spilled dough and, sighing and arguing with herself, got up and decided to think over the shepherd's words. "I'm going to have a quick bath and then I'm going to clean the kitchen." Peter was serious that day and didn't joke. But in the evening he suggested going to the cinema and then sitting by the river. Time passed and Kate was slowly drawn into the village life, not the easiest. A month later, Mary came back and began to help the girl, teaching her various wisdoms. And things were getting better, but Kate realized that she wouldn't last long. Television did not work here, the internet was slow, and her content did not include payment for private operators. And there was still time, apart from work. A little diluted the monotonous days with walks with Peter in the neighborhood. He had promised to make her a professional tourist, but it was too little to forget about life in the city. Sometimes Kate made plans to go back and do something worthwhile, but when would that be, and in what status? Or Daddy would jump up and she'd have to become a coward's wife. Slowly she got to know the neighbors. She got to know Mary better, and when she visited her, she was very interested in what she was doing. And then Mary treated her to some homemade cheese. Since that time, Kate has been thinking, and when the opportunity arose on an old phone looking for materials on modern cheese making, began in the evenings, when tiredness did not sleep, something to write down, research, read, and count. And once again, in a conversation with my father, I spoke about cheese making, and my father did not resist and immediately agreed. He, of course, wanted to understand how seriously the daughter wants to change in life. And he decided that the first step can be made, and then let herself. In the meantime, a little home venture, not a great waste. The main thing, he thought, as long as it would do good. A few days later, the equipment was brought, but Peter knew nothing, and from him she received a serious reprimand for arbitrariness. Firstly, you need a room or a kitchen for it. Secondly, where to get the milk, a reasonable question. Wouldn't you have enough of your own? He gave the girl a bit of a stern talking to. I don't own the milk. And what's more, I've got a month's contract with Tom. How can I refuse him now? After all, the advance has already been taken. Kate got hot, went into the grove, which is around the bend in the meadows. She cried again that freedom was not hers. On her way back, she ran into Mary at the gate, and Mary, realizing that the girl was worried again, embraced her and began to question her. Kate, why are you sad again? Did Peter hurt you? Come on, tell me, with whom else will ease your soul? I understand that you have friends, but you're not ready to brag about your country life to them. Are you? Yes, Mary, you're right. I can't tell them. Not because I'm ashamed. They wouldn't know what I mean. No, Peter's not offended. It's just that I want to try making cheese. And he said the milk's all contracted out. How am I supposed to get started? Well, don't worry, I'll give you a little milk, 5 liters a day. I can't do more than that. I've got a family to feed too. Try a little and then you'll see. Oh, you'll really give me milk. How am I going to pay you back? Kate was so happy. Of course I will. Don't think about money. Try to learn to make cheese, and then you'll pay with cheese, said Mary, laughing. Now get your equipment set up. In the morning you'll have your first milk. And don't worry, I'll talk to Peter too, and he'll give you more milk. Learn and try. All day Kate read the instructions, learnt the process from start to finish. She had a site for a cheese factory, but she waited for Peter to talk to her about her intention. Peter, here's what I'm thinking. You're right, I've kind of made up my own mind, but you could help me out a little bit. Here's the most convenient place for my little vat. Peter liked the girl's plea, but pity is nothing, and the image of a strong and unwavering man is everything. He didn't agree 100%. Why would I want to do that? Here's another headache for me. The man twisted himself with excuses. But seeing how the girl's eyes faded, turned back and, pointing to a large table by the window, said, "This is where we'll put it." Kate, not believing her ears, broke into a smile, jumped up, hugged Peter and said, "I've been thinking about this place too." All evening the boys read and assembled the boiler. All the appliances are in place. Everything is connected, both water and electricity. Now, seated in a chair opposite the technical marvel, Kate reread the cheese-making instructions for the 100th time, wrote down the proportions and prepared all the spices. And having looked round at her new hobby, unlike all the previous ones, she went to bed. And in the morning, a new life began. The first batch was a failure, but Kate didn't give up. And immediately, having found a way to fix the cheese, she got on with it. Now it's time to prepare a separate shelf in the fridge. The warmest one possible so the cheese could ripen. Hot days were beginning for the girl. The cheese was coming along. Kate experimented with flavors and ripening times. She used goat's milk. Peter didn't spare it, and even decided to buy a couple more stubborn horned animals for the occasion. The milk contract was coming to an end, and Kate consoled herself with the thought that Peter would now use it for cheese, rather than renegotiate the contract with Tom. But Peter was silent. In the village, meanwhile, people were coming there to taste, and so far in the eyes of the villagers her scheme seemed a dabble. Then Kate went again on smart websites and books and realized that in order for cheese making to become not just fun, but a profitable business, you need to expand production and look for a market. For a girl who had never dealt with such issues, it all seemed incomprehensible. But Mary advised her to talk to a maths teacher who often helped local farmers with bookkeeping. It was with him that Kate finally realized where she needed to go. Here she learnt the basics of calculations and was already able to make a small report of food intake and consumption. She learned to calculate the cost and to take into account all the expenses, including water, light, and even a little of her own labor. Yes, thought Kate, who knew I could see such horizons in my life. She decided to ask for money to expand production at least a couple more of these boilers. After all, she makes all kinds of cheese. Storage was also an issue. She had her eye on a small pantry behind the kitchen. There, if a little work, quite good and homemade, will come out here in the kitchen and in the cellar to put special refrigerators and a chamber for cheese, and in the local shop to rent a corner for their products. Her thoughts raced ahead, and Kate was already imagining how her products would get to the most elite shop. And she only had time to count the proceeds. And then Daddy's inheritance is of no use to her. She can manage on her own. That's the way out. That's what Dad used to say, become your own person. Well, that's what you're going to get, Daddy dear. I won't marry Peter the shepherd, and I'll choose my own husband. And I won't give him any money. He won't control my life. With such dreams now, more and more often Kate fell asleep and searched for a solution. Her father flatly refused to give her money, even on credit. Peter seemed to have money, but not much. And it is undesirable to ask him, because it is still necessary to persuade him to expand the business, and then the milk will be more needed from his cows will not be enough. So Kate pondered, and once she wrote down her goal and steps to it, she began to look for money in earnest. She went through a lot of options. Her friends fell out at once. Mary? Yeah, she'd probably help. But Kate didn't want to risk her money. She was a kind woman, very helpful. And like Peter, she probably doesn't have much money. Rummaging through her wardrobe, Kate came across her signature dresses. Here was something that could be used, and again the reflection. The money they cost she'd never get back. Here in the village they might buy them. But where would the local beauties get the money? Even half or a quarter of the price. Another dead end. And suddenly I had an epiphany. After all, and before often bought in boutiques through the internet, that's where it will come in handy. And the case began. Having tried with one dress, she was able to lay them all out and sell them for a tidy sum. It would be enough for another set of equipment, and probably even a cow. But more money was needed. And then Kate remembered that Mary had complained that her son Anthony was not learning French well, and decided that her philological education would not be lost. The barter was quickly arranged, every 2 lessons for payment with milk and the 3rd for free. And so it went. There were 6 pupils and more milk for work. Kate had the hardest time getting used to the everyday part of life in the village. She was glad that the village was a village and that she had a modern washing machine. Peter even had a dishwasher in the kitchen. It made life a lot easier. But still, the habit of getting up from the table without putting the dishes away sometimes made itself felt. And then in the morning it was unpleasant to see dishes that had dried up overnight. Mary helped, but she rightly thought that now there were 2 people in the house, she had someone to do the housework. And she had a family and 4 children. It's a big household, so she came for a while and occasionally helped Kate, for which the girl was grateful. In her sometimes woke up longing for city life. She wanted to leave everything and go away to hang out, as they said, in their own circles. Life there seemed like a dream at times, but so sweet and desirable. A lot of things had changed. Kate really looked at many things differently, and the goal of doing things her own way, without violating the will of her father, fooled her endeavor and revealed the abilities inherent in nature. But having raised the necessary sum, Kate decided to talk to Peter about expanding the business, using her feminine intuition and Mary's advice. She cooked Peter's favorite meal for dinner, a large steak and roasted vegetables, adding a warm lentil salad and of course cheese. Peter returned from grazing tired. The day was overcast and drizzling rain at times. During Kate's time in the village, late spring had changed to summer, which had passed most of the way. It was already time to make hay. Autumn was approaching and a hot, hearty supper was in order. "What's our feast today?" Surprised at the abundance of food on the table, asked the owner of the house. "There is no holiday, just dinner." "I must have got a taste for it, learning all sorts of wisdom," replied the girl. "Look, you'll get such a taste for it that you'll want to be my wife," Peter continued. "But you've gone too far," said Kate. "I remember when you supported me, saying that Daddy was taking too much control of our lives. And now you've almost given me to yourself. Or have you fallen in love with me too and want to marry me?" She wanted to talk business first. But she couldn't suppress her feminine side either. This daring and handsome shepherd had pissed her off a little by not noticing her feminine charms, and she knew their value. Fall in love? No, it's not for me, Peter said over his shoulder, a little saddened. Your father's tricks. Yeah, he's made up his mind, but who knows how life will turn out. Peter, I intend to get out of this situation. And if you're still with me, then help me, you'll win. Kate began the business part of the conversation. What are you talking about? The man was surprised. I figured out a way to slip out of this agreement. All I need from you is your consent, and a little physical help. The young businesswoman went on the offensive. So more details. What do you need? The man asked interestedly. You know, I've enjoyed cheese making, and I'm thinking of it as an opportunity to get out of my father's trap. More on that later. Right now, the main thing is that I need space for more equipment. Kate began. But I've got all the space. You can see that. Do you want the kitchen? And where to prepare food? The man asked dejectedly. No, I don't need the kitchen. This pantry is almost empty. If you dismantle everything and put the equipment in there, there's plenty of room. And in the cellar you can install a chamber for ripening and storage. Kate continued. Well, you've got an idea. How long are you going to cook it? And where to sell it? What's in it for me? Peter deliberately poured questions into the girl, so he wanted to cool down her ardor a little. After all, he wanted her to stay longer, and she was already making plans and wanted to run away. Well, I'll pay for electricity and water according to the meter, and I'll find a market. I've got plans. What about you? Kate moved a plate with fat cubes of 3 kinds of cheese, which she had already mastered. Peter was silent, looking at the cheese like a true connoisseur. He considered the size of one of the cubes in his hand, understanding its firmness and consistency, then tasted it. All the while he was thinking about what to say to the girl. Sure, she gave him trouble at first. But look how determined she is. Just like her father, she's determined, and she's going for it. It's a good thing she asked. I mean, she could have done it herself and left him to it. The girl was getting on his nerves more and more. True, he resisted his feelings, so he delayed. He often went out with friends, trying not to think about her. But then he'd rush home to see her and find out what else she'd done. You know, this is surprisingly good. No, don't think I meant any offense. It's just that you've never done this before, and you're in the bag. That's just lucky. Peter tried to respond. You know, I was surprised myself. Kate suddenly perked up and began to talk very brightly and enthusiastically about the recipes for her flavor discoveries in cheese. She was captivated by the business and was discovering a whole new sensation. A different side of herself opened up. Peter looked at her and admired her. The girl was directly catching fire. Her eyes glistened with excitement, and her story about cheese plunged the man into sweet dreams of family. But if she wanted to get out of her father's agreement, she would leave in a hurry. It's a dilemma of want and need, as they say. But the way Kate began to change, very much like the head of the cow herd, and therefore he will not interfere. It's better to help than to feel sorry for being a coward. Let's try it, Peter said at last. But I don't have that much money. I've got the money, said Kate, satisfied with the conversation. And where did you get it, if it's no secret? Asked the young man. Just a little, and I sold the cheese. And then my daring outfits, Dolce & Gabbana, all sorts of worn and put up for auction. The girl continued with pride for her ingenuity. Here on the equipment and gained. Now to put it up and run. And you can store cheese in the cellar for now. While there are no cameras, milk is only need more. I can help you with that now. Tom and I have a deal that's coming to an end. He does the milk in the summer, and my cows are free of obligation for autumn and winter. That's great news. Kate jumped up from her chair and hugged Peter. Now we can earn money. Yay! Thus began a new phase in Kate's life. Or rather, it had started earlier, that very morning in the middle of May, when her father had declared his will to her. Now it's a full-blown streak, and now the days are filled with meaning and plans. Equipment has been purchased, and cheese making has become a defining part of Kate's life. Recipes she found quickly. Mindful of her gastronomic preferences and the variety of cheeses, she quickly created groups of them. Sheep cheeses are, of course, quality brinza and feta from cow's milk, The largest range she would like to realize, from simple Kostroma to Swiss to delicacies like Brie and Roquefort. And for an appetizer, spicy goat's cheese. It's good for hard cheeses. You could do a local Parmesan too. Yeah, the dreams, ahead of the possibilities, were painting such fantastic pictures. Kate did not think to give up in the course of the idea of earning money herself, and thus get away from her father's tutelage, and maybe, and proving her worth, to regain his trust, was very tempting. Then, with marriage, perhaps he would leave her alone. The girl imagined cloudy prospects. She dreamed of her father proudly and favorably embracing his daughter and returning her name to the will. Peter bites his elbows that he was rude, inattentive. He should be thanked, though. He saved his father's life. So she'll leave this first batch of cheese to him. Let him herd cows and eat cheese. Dreams like that spurred the girl's endeavors. And now people started to ask for cheese and buy it not only for tasting, but also for holidays and for breakfast. And visiting relatives of villagers with pleasure joined the natural product. The work boiled over. Only there was not enough milk. We had to buy some. Kate was already immersed in the cheese business. She quickly found a lot of online courses and techniques not only for production, but also all the accounting associated with it. To promote their product, acquired certificates, attended courses of famous chefs. I was already thinking about how to turn my business into a brand. But these were dreams and desires. They were growing massively on the framework of an already existing goal. The silhouette of a dream with a framework was already impressive, and the premature dreams about the brand were an appetizer, so to speak, for pleasant reflections before going to bed. Winter is quite early and long in these parts. Kate was a little bored at first with her former life in the city skyscrapers. She longed for the coziness of the short days and long nights. But then Peter began to help her. He, free from his daily routine, took care of the bride's affairs. This encouraged the girl, and she, no longer shy and used to the title of bride, went to parties with Peter's friends. At first, the guys were a little shunned the young woman, but gradually Kate found a rapport with them. And that's where the cheese business helped. Everyone wanted details, and that was Kate's finest hour. She'd tell and she'd treat. She liked the change, very much a lively life around her, young people working, doing their own thing. There's the Lumberjack brothers. They were jokingly called the Grimm brothers. Their wives are also two sisters. Incredible fate. Tom Dairyman, that's what they called him. They also had their own hunters and fishermen. Kate had a chance to go fishing and hunting, skiing down the mountains, sledging. There was a lot to do here. About entertainments in the capital outside the city limits, it was said that there was no life there. And what did the capital surprise the golden youth? Clubs? No, it's life here in existence there. Kate Smith was a philosopher, gaining momentum and already thinking about expansion. So was Peter. Kate's talk of her hobby got him so interested that he started thinking of buying a couple more cows and increasing his herd of goats. He even found a breed that was new to the area, but close. They didn't smell at all. It was the smell that sometimes confused buyers. A friend from a neighboring street suggested sheep's milk for cheese. The business grew with plans, help. In general, it was happy with acquaintances and opportunities. Winter snowed and went on its way. Peter and Kate's relationship became trusting and closer. From the outside, it looked like they were a married couple, but each of them remembered the past comfortable life without obligations to third parties. So they continued to keep their distance. New Year's Eve was celebrated at Peter's friend's house. There, in nature, among a scattering of stars, Kate was completely confused. No, not outwardly, but in her soul. Suddenly, having removed the scales of everyday life and some past habits, she was awakened. The heavens opened up, the stars so large and bright in this winter sky. They winked and seemed to promise wonders and interesting stories. How much the girl learned here. Stories from the lives of villagers and Peter's friends were amazingly diverse. And if earlier Kate would have considered them just losers, now they were heroes in her eyes. And willingly or unwillingly, she tried to learn a little more about their lives. The party was a great success. A table full of homemade goodies, where, by the way, not the last treat was cheese of several kinds from Kate here for the first time, and a possible name of the future enterprise was born. One of the guys making a toast said in a rapid-fire voice, "Kate's cheese," and it turned out to be something Oriental or Italian Kate's cheese. The girl remembered the word. Here she rode for the first time on a harnessed trio of handsome horses, and her soul sang, listening to the girls singing songs, and melted. You feel the beauty of life itself. Then the whole village let off fireworks and salutes. There are rules here, and it was allowed to do it at a certain time and in a certain place. But it was a great experience for everyone, and the animals living in the neighborhood are not frightened. Winter has passed, and the first timid spring streams ran down from the mountains. The sky was bright, and the blood boiled, demanding change. The cheese sold well. There was enough capacity, and milk was not a problem. The question of expansion came up. A friend of Peter's friends suggested Kate's products for sale, so the business was moving to the next level. Peter also enjoyed the whole cheese story. Expansion, of course, required funds. And now we had to think how to realize the idea of a couple of new sets, more spacious equipment. About the equipment, on lease told the very city mates. A quarter of the business is milk. Many in the village agreed to donate milk for cheese production. Sales loomed with an additional couple of points. What remained was to purchase an additional chamber for ripening cheese. While this was being sorted out, Kate was approached by the school and invited to a meeting without giving a reason. Kate went. The girl was met by the headmaster, a tall, thin, and venerable man, who introduced himself. Mr. Pedersen, headmaster. Kate Smith, replied the girl. Miss Kate Smith is very important. Respect in school is the most important element of education. I have a matter to discuss with you. We have exams and tests for graduation and transfer soon, and we don't have a language teacher. After the new year, she fell ill and left. And neither we nor the district education department have another one. I hear you tutor kids. Kate caught the catch, but realizing that she couldn't be rude to a senior person in age and position, she slowed down and replied without irritation. And what documents do you need for that? No, I must have expressed myself wrongly. Did you study somewhere, or is this not your main subject? Mr. Pedersen clarified. Here's the revised text. Oh, is that what you mean? Yes, I studied Romano-Germanic philology and even have a diploma, but no experience, Kate answered calmly. Well, now I see, do you want to work for us? There are not so many lessons. You will have enough free time, and you'll earn money and experience. And don't say you don't know how to do it. You'll learn. And the guys you study with will be your best references for other students. Our classes are small. I think you can do it. Everyone's heard about your courage to go from town to country. What do you think? The headmaster asked, concluding the conversation. It's so unexpected, Kate said thoughtfully. But if you really need a teacher so badly, I'll give it a try. And now it's spring. Everything is blooming. The air is full of fragrance, buds are swelling, the sun is brighter, and Peter is out inspecting the pastures. And Kate had a hard time at first. The boys looked at her suspiciously and asked her uncomfortable questions. Are you coming here for a long time or what? Kate, realizing that they were distrustful of newcomers, replied, Guys, I've been hired to help you prepare for exams and tests. I'm a substitute teacher, that's all. The older guys made some noise among themselves, but they were satisfied with the answer, and the study began. The head teacher helped and explained all the teachers' programs. Kate had to remember everything about pedagogy, and here the internet helped. She wrote out books online, looked at open classes in schools. First, she decided to check her knowledge level. She was very pleased that the knowledge gained at university was not lost and was remembered at the right moment. That's how the village lived. In spring, all the windows were covered with greenery. It was vegetable sprouts, preparation for the vegetable gardening season. The cows and the herd looked back at the paths leading to the meadows, to the pasture. Kate's father came round a couple of times, trying to find out how things were going and how the young people were getting on. He liked their chaste relationship, right? Nothing to rush into. And he liked the routine. His daughter had learnt to cook and seemed to have settled down. Kate kept her cheese business quiet. She only told her father what she needed to know about that first batch of cheese. That's the cheese she used to serve. Daddy, so you don't want to take me away at all? Kate asked her daughter with a chuckle. Why don't you like it here? You're already in class. And your ex-girlfriends and their mates are all out clubbing. They had a car accident the other day. Now they're in court. I saved you by sending you here, said my father. Will you give me some good cheese? I'll show off to my friends. Good for you, my girl. You're growing up, getting smarter. Going home? Dad was always in a hurry, never stayed long. And that confused Kate a little bit. Maybe he was afraid she'd whinge. Or maybe it was better that way, because she wanted to tell her father about her successes, but it wasn't time yet. She needed to expand production. And then she could issue an ultimatum he wouldn't revoke his will, so I could manage without your money. Time was working for her now, a few more months, and she could talk to her dad. But sometimes she wanted to have fun. She didn't keep in touch with her friends from her old life, though. They couldn't understand why she was still in the village. Her successes and different outlook on things would certainly piss them off. That was why she was in no hurry to share it with them. But she wanted to visit the city, for her current endeavors were all for the purpose of returning. Though how that would be, she had never once thought about it. In the meantime, the girl enjoyed working at the school and found new admirers. The guys liked her unusual teaching methods. Kate introduced the rule to speak in class only in a foreign language, so the language habit was formed faster. They watched unduplicated films together and tried to retell them. Interest was aroused and grades improved. It was a pleasure. And cheese, of course, was not only a means of earning money, but also a business she enjoyed doing. But time is inexorable, and now it's late spring again. Soon it would be time to report to her father and announce the wedding day to him. Of course, this fact tickled nerves. Marriage was sometimes wanted, but purely out of resistance to her father's will no. Kate liked Peter. The relationship had changed a lot, and they had become quite close. They did a lot of things together, but it was still chasing a divorce as they dubbed their problem. Everything was smooth sailing. What's next? Peter also wondered, what's next after all? Kate had won his heart. And maybe that first kiss would change everything. It would set the heart of a free shepherd on fire. But would he be ready to marry on the day of the wedding? Everyone was worried. It had to be decided whether or not to marry. His father didn't come, but sent a video message. In it, he told in detail how he liked these places, how he would like to settle here and help his daughter to become independent and self-sufficient. And I wanted to thank the Savior. He's a good guy. And then, who knows, maybe you'll fall in love with each other. Mr. Smith announced the last clause of the contract, which had been hidden until now. It stated that if the young people agreed to marry, their father promised to organize the wedding, build a big house, and take the farm to the next level. But if their hearts didn't beat in unison, he would agree to let them go. Kate's probably grown up now, and with more experience, she's not going to mess up her life anymore. And maybe she'll go into business for herself. So it's up to the young people to decide what to do next, said father. But the inheritance is still in doubt. Firstly, I'm not going anywhere, and my daughter will have to prove her worthiness. This changed the situation radically, and the young people looked at each other and did not understand what to do next. It seemed that they did not have to fight, and there were no demands. Silently, they went to their rooms. Kate no longer thought about cheese and began to decide whether to leave now or to wait. She wondered whether she would be able to leave everything. Peter went into the cowshed and looked sadly at his herd. He had strange feelings at this moment, and he wanted at times his quiet, lonely life, his search for meaning in philosophy, and his discoveries as a shepherd. But on the other hand, the feelings had already taken possession of the man, and he wanted the rich girl who had learned her lesson to stay longer, and perhaps forever. And she was slowly packing up her things, the ones she had bought here herself, with her own hard-earned money, and with a smile the remains of her branded wardrobe. And yet she was very much tormented by the question, could she leave everything behind, except the samovar, which Peter would have handled himself? Or Mary, for a fee, would engage. New friends might understand. And even Peter, who was increasingly taking up a place in her heart, even he could do without her and not be an obstacle to her return. And then there was the other question. The boys at school, they believed her, didn't they? There's a bigger issue here. In the morning, Kate came downstairs to make breakfast. Cheesecakes were churning deliciously in the frying pan, and coffee was in the pot. On the table, homemade bread and cheese. On a special wooden board that Peter had carved, Footsteps were heard, the door opened, and first came the milk pails. "Mary, is that you?" A velvet voice sounded. "Why, Mary?" "It's me," the girl answered quietly. Peter tripped and knocked over the milk pail, showering Kate's legs with a white wave and flying past the table, almost falling, but she caught his arm. Peter leveled himself and put his arm round Kate. "You haven't left? I thought I'd never see you again," he said with sadness in his voice. "I've decided, can I leave the cheese, you guys, and you too?" The words were drowned in a kiss. He solved all questions. Of course, there will still be nuances in this story, but the beginning of a new chapter is laid. And Mr. Smith is very pleased. His daughter has changed in a year. Her decision to stay on, even without becoming Peter's wife, was very pleasing. Responsible and clever, just like her father. He rejoiced quietly and slowly began to build the house. "Larry, hi." Wait, she heard a shout from behind her. She looked back and Vincent was running after her. He lived here too, so they knew each other. She waited for him, and when he caught up with her, he walked beside her. "Where are you from?" wondered the girl. "What are you doing out so late?" "It's already dark here," he asked her. "I'll do what I want for you," she said proudly, and walked on. Vincent had been following her all this time. He just liked the girl and wanted to walk her home. When her house came into view, Vincent took her hand, turned her around, and looked into her eyes. "Larry, how can you not realize that I love you?" he mumbled to her. "Oh, leave me alone. Soon I'll finish school, go to the city, and find a good fiancé. He'll have an apartment, a car, money, and he'll take me on vacations to the sea," Larry said dreamily. "Is it because I don't have money that I'm worse?" Vincent asked her. "I'm not saying who is worse or better. I'm just saying that I don't want to marry a country boy. I'll go to the city, and then I'll have everything." The girl looked at him and didn't want to talk anymore. "So does that mean it's over?" he asked her. "Did we have a beginning?" She didn't understand. "You've always been good to me. We used to dance at discos. At school, we talked a lot. I thought you liked me. That's why I was running," Vincent told her. "What were you thinking?" Larry didn't understand. She liked him, yes, but just as a friend. She could go anywhere with him, knew he'd stand up for her, but she'd never planned for him to think they were together. Vincent tilted his head. He didn't want to talk to the girl anymore. He'd really thought she liked him, but it turned out she had other plans. To go into town, to meet some rich daddy, and maybe stay there with him. He didn't even look at her, just turned around and walked away. "Bye, Vincent," she said after him. But the young man didn't even look back. He walked on, tears dripping from his eyes. He couldn't let anyone look at someone like him right now. Vincent just wanted to go home, lie on his bed, and do nothing else. Larry stood there for a moment. She shrugged her shoulders, turned toward her house, and walked there quickly. "Larry, where are you walking?" her mother asked as she entered the house. "Mom, I'm an adult. Stop lecturing me," Larry said, and went to her room. She's grown up, of course. As soon as she asks for money, so Mommy give it, Daddy give it, and as soon as she's been somewhere else, she's grown up, said the woman, resenting the way her daughter was talking to her. But no one could do anything, and so everyone kept silent. Mom knew that if she started being rude to Larry now, they'd have a fight, and then the girl would just pack up and leave, and no one wanted that. So they all went to bed. In the morning, it would be a different conversation. Larry was going to school. She went there every day. The girl didn't study very well, but she did well, and that pleased her parents. Now, when she was going to enroll, her mother told her more than once that she had to study to get a good score. But Larry didn't care about that. Well, if her daughter didn't need it, her mother didn't need her to go to school, because she could count, write, read, what else was needed for a child. And when the exams were over, the boys stood in the yard. They were preparing to receive their certificates. The next day they had to go to the city to submit their documents. Larry dreamed of entering the institute to study economics. She had all the potential for it. She always got good grades in math. And now she and her mom were on the bus to the train station. "Larry, are you sure you've chosen the profession you want?" her mother asked her. Of course, I've been coming to this for a long time. And I'm not going to give up on the idea now, Larry said. Her mother was not against it, although they were entering college, but it was a good one, so the woman had no doubt that her daughter would graduate from this educational institution and later become a good specialist. They arrived. The admission committee filled out all the documents. Luda was left here because she had to take some preparatory courses to know better what would be on the exams. The girl immediately fluffed up her tail, because she came here not only to enroll, but also to find a man with whom she could build a future life. But as they say, you can't escape fate, and Larry saw her acquaintance in a cafe on the third day. Vincent, hi, what are you doing here? She came up to him. Probably the same thing you did, coming to enroll, he told her. Vincent was still resentful inside for what Larry had said to him back in the village. It was obvious that he didn't want to talk to her. Well, are you still upset with me? She didn't understand. No, I'm not offended. It's just that I opened my soul to you and you spit in it, he told her. Listen, where did you go to school? Larry asked him, just curious. Law school, he looked at her. Oh, I remember you always wanted to do that, Larry told him. Then she sat down at his table because she couldn't sit here alone and called the waiter over to her. He took her order. Now Larry sat silently, looking at Vincent and waiting for her order to arrive. She felt so happy, but she realized that she would have to go back to the village after she got here to bring her things back. They sat there for a few hours today, and then Vincent started talking to Larry. They discussed many things, and it seemed to her that maybe she would start dating Vova, because he said he liked her. In the evening, the young man walked the girl to the dormitory, and then they met more than once. Larry, are we going out tonight? Vincent asked her when he came to her again. Well, let's go, the girl agreed. If before she didn't want to communicate with him, now, in another city, she was even somehow proud of the fact that she was dating a guy, and no one else had time to get acquainted with anyone. Vincent had some money, so he took the girl to cafes, movie theaters, and other places. That flattered Larry. She wondered why she hadn't paid any attention to him in the village. It wasn't so bad now that they were students. Vincent came over, gave her gifts. The girls were jealous of Larry, and she was better for it. One day, when she was graduating from college, Vincent asked her to marry him. Will you marry me? He looked at her. Of course, they held hands. The very next day, Vincent and Larry went to the registry office and filed the application. I don't understand why I didn't want to hang out with you before, the girl said. And I don't understand it either. I'm promising, I'm studying, I'll graduate soon, I'll have a profession, he said, and shrugged. Larry was glad of that, because she knew that if Vincent decided to do something, he would do it. My parents were informed, and they insisted on registering at the city registry office, and then coming to the village and celebrating the wedding there. After all, it was in the village that all the acquaintances, friends, and relatives lived. The young people did not argue, because there was a lot of fun, and after they said yes at the registry office, took the marriage certificate and went to the village. The parents had done a great job. They had set up tables right outside, a lot of guests had come, and now Vincent and Larry were sitting at the head of the table, and they were very happy. Well, young people, bitter. One of the guests stood up and raised his glass. The young people kissed. Everything was fine. Larry, what have you decided about where you're going to live after the wedding? Her mom asked her tonight. Of course, in the city. Where else? Vincent still had 2 more years of school. We'll get an apartment and live there, Larry told her, because she didn't see any other options. Good, I am happy for you. If you need money, just ask, and my father and I will definitely help you, said the mother, and hugged her daughter. Larry was glad to hear this, for she had no job yet, and Vincent had only a scholarship, and that was just an ordinary one. After a week in the village, they went to the city. Larry had to look for a job, and Vincent was not idle. He decided that his studies were taking up a lot of his time, but he had to get a job. Larry had no trouble getting a job in the education department, in the economics department. At first, she was just an intern. She was put on probation, and then she became like everyone else. She closed out statements, did payroll, and other things. Vincent went back to school in September. He couldn't find a job except at a cafe where he'd been offered a job as a waiter. But Larry urged him to take it because every penny counted. Vincent didn't refuse, and as winter approached, he went to work. It was a penniless salary, hers and his, but it was enough to pay the rent and buy a month's worth of groceries. "We'll be fine," Larry told him, and hugged him. Everything was really fine in the family until the girl felt sick. "What is the matter with you?" Vincent looked at his wife and saw how pale she was. "Vince, I think you're going to be a daddy soon," the girl looked at him playfully. "Okay, Daddy, so Daddy, I'm very happy about it," he said. After that, the girl really found out that she was pregnant. And it began constantly in the morning: nausea, backache, it was impossible to walk. She barely made it to her maternity leave, and when she went into it, she just laid down on the DVJ and didn't get up. "Why are you always lying on the bed?" Her husband used to say to her. He was just annoyed by it. "Try it, walk," she told him in return. But Vincent didn't care about that. He was in his last year, and now he had to prepare not only for the session, but also for his final exams and to write his diploma. He had to quit his job because he didn't have enough time for everything. And now there was practically no money in the family. I had to constantly call my parents for help. Finally, the long-awaited day came when Larry was due to give birth. It had been a long and slow process. The pain that overcame the girl was unrelenting. Larry screamed, the doctors soothed, but it had to be done. Finally, when everyone heard the baby scream, Larry exhaled and realized that she would never give birth again. "Congratulations on your baby, girl." A midwife came up to her with packages in her hands. "Let me see her," said Larry. And when the girl was placed beside her, she couldn't be glad that the little lump she had just given birth to was lying next to her. Both mother and child were doing well. Vincent came to pick them up a few days later. After that, they registered the baby. And now Larry's life was even more complicated than it had been before. The formula, the diapers, all of it was a struggle. Vincent didn't help because he was always busy, even though Larry asked him to. It was like a black cat had come between husband and wife. They started fighting all the time, but by the time Evie had to go to kindergarten and Larry had to go to work, things seemed to have settled down. Things went back to normal between the couple, but it didn't last long. "Can you take Evie to daycare today?" Larry asked her husband. "Why, you're going to work anyway," he told her. You understand, she wanted to tell him that she had to get ready, iron everything, do her hair, wash her hair. But she didn't say any of that, because she saw that he wouldn't take anyone to kindergarten. Then Larry would dress the girl and they would go. Vincent delved deeper into the fact that he was looking for a job. Every day he went somewhere, made phone calls, put on suits, went for interviews, but nothing worked out. Somewhere they wouldn't hire just because he didn't have experience and seniority. There the pay was small. There only as an intern. Well, what did you want? That you'd come in and they'd tell you right away, would you like to be a judge or a prosecutor? Larry used to tell him. It seemed to Vincent now that she was no longer the Larry he'd once loved. She'd been so jaded over the years that she'd gone from a beautiful girl to a gem. It was only going to get worse from here. Vincent got a job somewhere, a law firm. He did as he was told. Of course, he didn't like anything, but he put up with it, walking around, thinking he'd be promoted soon. "Why did you take the job here?" "Because there were plenty of offers just like it." Larry asked him. "Look, don't distract me, please," he told her as he sat at his desk, going through some papers. Okay, his wife pulled away from him. She realized that their relationship was not working out at all lately, so she made the only decision that seemed right to her now, which was to divorce him. When Evie was in second grade, Larry first talked about divorce. She didn't want to change anything, but she had no other choice, so she told Vincent that they had to get a divorce. He looked at her perplexed at first, then got up from the table and walked silently into the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water, drank it, and turned to Larry again. "Are you sure you mean what you say?" he asked her. "Absolutely," she answered him. "Okay, then go apply tomorrow. I don't think there'll be any problems. We have no assets in common. The daughter, I understand, will stay with you, and everything else." He grinned, looked around, and realized that there was nothing else. Just as Vincent had said, The next day, Larry filed for divorce. She didn't want to live like that anymore. She didn't get much, but she and her daughter would have enough for the two of them. Vincent didn't wait for the divorce to go through. He packed up his things and went wherever the hell he wanted to go. And that you won't even regret the job you worked, his wife asked him as he packed his things. I've been working there for several years now. I work like a horse, but I don't get anything out of it, he told her. I've been working there for a few years now. I work like a horse, but I get nothing, he told her. He threw down his bag, looked at his wife again, hugged his daughter, and left the apartment. The first thing he did was to go to the train station. He had to see if there were tickets, where they were going, and what he would do where he would go. There were very few tickets. And when the woman cashier told him that there were several tickets to one of the cities he had once dreamed of, Vincent did not hesitate to buy one of those all tickets. Now he sat in the compartment, looking out the window and mentally saying goodbye to this city, realizing that he would never come back here again. His mother and father were waiting for him at home, but he decided not to go to them. He called to say he was fine. They divorced Larry, but the daughter also did not stop communicating with him, her grandmother and grandfather. And when Evie asked her mom at home where her dad was, her mom told her that he had died. What do you mean, he's dead? The girl didn't understand. Well, just like that, you know, when a person is gone and will never be again, her mother used to explain to her. Evie didn't understand it because one buries the dead, and she hadn't buried her father. From that moment on, Larry began a life of debauchery. She had set herself a plan to find a husband to provide for her and her daughter, and now she had to fulfill that plan. She went to work, bought herself different outfits, was very showy, constantly wearing makeup, styling her hair, bringing home different men. Evie saw it all. She didn't like it at first. But when she was in the 6th grade, she looked up to her mother and started doing things too. At first, the girl got into a bad company where her friend brought her. The guys that were older than the girls by several years, they could do there what was forbidden: smoking, drinking, kissing. But when the girl came home, no one controlled her there. She could go to her room without hindrance and go to bed. The mother noticed that something was wrong with her daughter, but did not say anything to her because she really did not catch her daughter by the hand. And that's all Evie wanted. In 8th grade, the girl went wild. The first time Evie had close contact with a young man. She didn't say that she was very upset, but she wasn't happy either. She just didn't understand what the big deal was. The girl returned home. She went to bed. At night, she dreamed about some murk. Everything was scary. Everything was black all around, some blood, something else. She didn't understand what the dream meant. She woke up in the morning, her mother still wasn't home. It didn't really stress the girl out because she knew that her mom might not come through, and for 2 days she would be late at work. She would go somewhere on those days, and now that Evie realized that she was doing whatever she wanted with impunity. Sometimes her mother came and said something to her, read some lectures, but Evie didn't want to listen to her because first of all it was late, and secondly it wasn't interesting. And what was the point of all these lectures if she could see a living example in front of her? Over the years, her father might have called her, but her mother didn't pick up the phone, so the girl thought Vincent didn't communicate with her. She never believed he was dead. The girl did not say anything to anyone. She was fine, but this is at first glance. But if the girl was shown to a psychologist, he would certainly say that a child in the 8th grade would not drink and smoke. In any case, he pours out some of his unhappiness or grief. Of course, no one could tell Larry that, so she didn't think it was a good thing, but she didn't say anything. One day the daughter came home and immediately went into her mother's room. "I need to talk to you," she told her. "All right, come on in and we'll talk," Larry agreed. She was sitting there painting her nails. "Mom, I think I'm expecting a baby," her daughter told her. "What makes you think that?" She was staring at her. "Well, first of all, I'm 2 months late. Secondly, I'm nauseous, and all the signs that I'm pregnant," the girl told her. The mother quickly called someone. They went to the hospital, even though it was already evening, but no one refused them because everyone knew each other. And after the girl was checked, it turned out that she was indeed expecting a child. And she already had not 1, and not even 2 months. "Okay, don't make any plans," Larry told her. "Why?" The girl didn't understand. "We'll probably have an abortion for you in a couple of days," she said, while she wondered how it could have happened. Then she grinned to herself and realized that with her lifestyle, anything could have happened without anyone noticing. Larry's eyes were on her daughter now, watching her all the time, watching what she was doing and how she was doing it. So when a few days had passed, she told Evie that they had to go to the hospital. The time was set for later, so that no one would know about anything and the girls would get there. "Mom, why at night?" her daughter asked her. "Do you have any idea why at night?" she asked her. They came in, Evie was put in a special chair, anesthesia was put in, and everything was done. And after she came to, the girl just cried. "Why are you crying now? You should have cried earlier," her mother told her. "Mom, don't you think you did a bad thing?" Evie told her she realized she had done it all herself, of course, but she didn't want to blame herself. "Don't you think you did the deed? I offered it to you. You didn't refuse. That was the end of it." They never brought up the subject again. But from that moment on, Evie became very distant from her mother. If earlier she wanted to finish 11 grades and then go somewhere else, now she had definitely decided that now, when 9th grade was coming to an end, she would not go any further. Evie had even already chosen the school she would be applying to and was determined to go there. She studied hard, but she was still good at some things, and some things she wasn't. Her mother tried to help her, but Evie refused any help. In the spring, Evie asked her mother about her father and why he didn't talk to them. She didn't answer, just waved her hand. The girl realized that her mother knew something and decided to find her phone number or something else to contact her father. And indeed, she found his phone number, called. Vincent was very happy because all these years, until they lived together, he called Larry almost every month, asking to get his daughter on the phone, but she didn't do it. No one knew why, whether out of jealousy or principle, but now that Evie had the digits of her father's number in her hand, she went to the phone and dialed his number. "Hello, Dad." "Hi," she said when she heard the phone answered. "Evie, is that you?" he asked her. "Yes, I am," she answered him, and she was very glad that now she was talking to a man whom she had once loved very much. She wanted to meet him very much, but it turned out to be impossible, because her father was in another city. ... That's it, he told her about it. "Dad, this is the city I'm going to go to," she told him. "Come on, is it true?" he asked her. "Of course I would deceive you. Then, when I arrive, I'll meet you, and I'll tell you everything," the girl told him. "Okay, then I'll wait for you. When are you going to come, in June or later?" he asked her. "I think that in June we will have graduation, and when we pass all the exams, only then I can come to you," the girl told him. "All right, I'll meet you, but be sure to let me know when and on what train you'll be leaving," he asked her. Of course, I'll let you know. Evie was so glad she had contacted her father, and now she thought things must be changing for her. The girl began to study a little better, because she was afraid that suddenly it would happen and she wouldn't be able to pass the exams, which meant that she would stay for the fall, and she could forget about admission. Now in her diary began to appear 4s and even 5s, but it was too early to rejoice. It was necessary to study until the end of the year, and then to look and think about what would happen next. And so, the exams were chosen. She was preparing for them, studying tickets and everything else. There were only a few days left until graduation. Evie was sure that she had passed everything. Now she just had to wait for the results. And when it was announced that she had passed everything, she couldn't help but rejoice. She didn't want to get ready for graduation, because Evie didn't like anyone in her class. The friends she'd been hanging out with recently were no longer friends. All she could think about now was getting her diploma and going to school. When the coveted paper was in her hands, she ordered tickets and only had to tell her mother that she was leaving, and everything else was unimportant. Evie realized that if she left now and lived there with her father, she would be better off than she was here. "Mom, I've already booked my tickets and I'll be enrolling in a few days," Evie told her, and she stood there smiling as if she had won the lottery. "Why didn't you tell me?" Larry glared at her angrily. She'd kept her daughter from her father for so long that she could just tell him she was going to him. "Mom, but you have your own life here. You're looking for a companion, so keep looking for him. And I'll be calmer there with Dad," the girl said. "With Daddy?" Larry questioned her then. shocked that her daughter had forgotten everything so easily. Yeah, with my dad. He lives in the same city where I am going to enroll. He promised he would meet me, and now that I'm coming, I think he and I will have a good relationship, the daughter told her mother, realizing that she was now pissing her off. Don't you think, the woman asked her, but didn't finish. What don't I think? Evie looked at her and smiled cheekily. That he'd leave you like he'd left us, Larry asked. She was angry with Vincent, so she wasn't having fun right now. Mom, he didn't leave us. You told him you wanted a divorce, and he agreed to let you go and file for divorce. You think if I was 8 or 9 years old? I don't remember that. Stood there and looked at her daughter. Okay, if you want, go. I will not keep you, but it will be bad. Call me again. Come running to me, the woman told her, and that was the end of their conversation. Evie waited for her mother to leave the house. She dialed her father's number and, when he answered, told him which train she would be taking, on which day, and where she would be arriving. Evie, I'm so glad we're going to meet. You have no idea, Vincent told her. Dad, I'm looking forward to this meeting too, she told him with confidence. And now the girl is already on the train. She is going on the route where she intended to go, and she knows that her own father is meeting her at the station. The girl on the way was reading different magazines, looking at pictures. She was not very interested in the ride, so when it got dark, she made up her bed and decided to get some sleep. Already in the morning, she felt that someone was pushing her. She saw that it was the conductor, who told her it was time to get off. From home, when she had called, and then when she had talked to her father, she hadn't felt this way. There was a calmness. But now she was getting the jitters. What she'd say to him, what they'd talk about. It had been so long since they'd seen each other that she had no idea what she would say. Evie thought at first that she wouldn't recognize the man who had left them years ago. But when she stepped onto the platform, looked around, saw him and smiled, that she was able to recognize Vincent immediately. He, too, saw the girl looking at him. She looked a lot like her mother, so he went straight to her. Hi, Daddy, she said to him. Hello, my dear, he hugged her, took her suitcase, and led her to the car. Wow, you turned around, she glared at him. Yes, you see, I came here, met a man, and he told me that he could help me find a job. And now, as you can see, he kept his promise, my father said. Yes, I see you're doing well, the girl mumbled. So now we'll go to my place, then we'll talk. And when you go to enroll further, we'll solve the issues in a different way. Evie stared at the man. She remembered what her father had been like. And now he was about the same, but different. Talked differently, businesslike, and everything else about him had changed too. She understood that a great deal of time had passed, but how a person could change almost completely in such a time, she could not realize. They arrived at the apartment. It was a spacious one-bedroom apartment, furnished with nice furniture, a TV, some kind of systems. Everything here was for living. The kitchen had a range. Everything was beautiful. Wow, you've turned around. Is it yours or do you rent? Evie asked about the apartment. Of course it's mine, said Vincent. Cool, the girl showed the class. I don't know whether your mother told you or not, but if I set a goal for myself, I will definitely achieve it. He put some papers on the table, sat down, and looked at his daughter. She walked over, sat down opposite him, and looked at him too. So, tell me, how have you been living all these years? Why didn't you want to talk to me? He asked her. I didn't even know you called, Evie said. She was hurt that her mother was doing this to her. She didn't want her daughter to talk to her father and do it behind her back. I see, I thought so for some reason, Vincent said, and then stood up, put the kettle on, and opened the fridge. What do you do for a living? His daughter asked him. I'm working at the court now. I think I'll be in charge there soon, he smiled. I see, she shook her head, flattered that her father held such a high-ranking position, but that wasn't the point of the conversation. After her father and Evie drank tea and had a snack, they began to talk about the girl's further enrollment. When are you going to go to college? Her father asked her. Daddy, can I go to school tomorrow instead of today? Because the road is so exhausting that I just want to sleep, she said. Yes, of course, what questions? There's still the whole summer ahead. He was not against it. After that, the girl went to her room, took apart her DVJ. Her father gave her a pillow, a blanket, and she just went to sleep. Turns out her body was so tired that Evie slept practically all day. She only woke up when her father came home in the evening. She was glad that now no one was telling her anything, and she was doing whatever she wanted to do on her own. Vincent looked at his daughter and he couldn't believe that now they were together again. He was willing to do anything for her. If Larry wouldn't let her go out with him before, he had full authority over this girl now. "Evie, come to dinner," he called her into the kitchen. The girl came in. She was still sleepy, but she sat down at the table and began to eat what her father had prepared. This is delicious," she said as she tasted one bite. "Yes, I tried to do that for you." He pointed with his eyes at the delivery boxes that lay under the sink. "Oh, I see how you made it," she laughed, because she wouldn't have guessed it herself. The father and daughter had an easy relationship, so the next day when Evie went to enroll, she applied. She waited until the day of the exams, took them all, and a few weeks later she found out that she was on the admission list. Wow, even for free her father looked at her. "Well, what did you want? I may not behave the way you want me to, but I have enough here." She tapped her finger on her head. "I see, so where do you want to live? With me or apart?" he asked her. "Well, of course I would like an apartment, at least a one-room apartment, then everything will be as it should be," said the girl. "Okay then, in a few weeks I'll get you an apartment, and you can live there," Vincent told her. Evie didn't mind that at all. She was even a little glad that her father was making such a concession for her. And when the apartment was found, my father called the landlord. He did everything he could. Vincent paid a year's rent in advance, so he wouldn't have to run around every month and pay. Evie was staying with him now, in the apartment his father had rented, and they were doing some minor cosmetic repairs. "Are you sure you can do this alone?" her father asked her. "Of course I'm sure. Why would I spoil your life? You're still young and handsome. You'll find yourself a woman, and you'll live together," she told him. Okay, did not argue with her father, because he was afraid of losing his favorite girl again, as it had happened once before. And after Evie moved out, he often came to visit her. She went to visit him. Their communication was like that of very good friends. Evie started studying. At first it was like she even liked it. At first she didn't go out anywhere. She didn't know anyone. But after she met her friends at school, she began to call them all home. One day after New Year's Eve, Vincent got a call from the school. "Hello, your daughter wasn't at school today," he was told, and he couldn't let it pass his ears. "Yeah, okay, I'll take care of it," Vincent answered quickly. He was about to hang up. Wait, not only hasn't she been today, but all of the previous week, the handler told him. You could hear that her voice wasn't as kind as it usually was. Wow, that's a separate dwelling. The man marveled at the time. He dialed Evie's number. She didn't answer for a long time, but when she did, he started to tell her off. "And what's that going on?" he asked her. "Dad, what are you talking about?" She didn't understand. "I just got a call from the school saying you've been skipping classes all last week," he mumbled to her, trying to make his voice rougher. "Listen, who are you listening to? There's nothing to do there. I've prepared everything, I got a credit. And that's it. Let's say I took a sick leave," his daughter asked him. "No sick days. Either you move in with me or you act like a decent girl," he told her. "That's it. I hear you," dropped the call to Evie. After that, he got calls from neighbors, teachers from the institution, but there was nothing he could do. Evie was behaving the way she liked. Different personalities were now showing up at the apartment. She tried to attend school because her father had set a condition, either study and an apartment, or no study and nothing else. So Evie woke up in the morning, even through force, washed up, changed her clothes, and went to study. It was not difficult to study. It was just lazy to get up and go there early in the morning. One day some company came to her house. There was one guy she didn't know. She didn't know the others. She didn't want to let them in, but when they exchanged a few words, everything went well. After that, Evie started hanging out with Murphy, who was in this company. At first he went home every night, but one day he just stayed overnight. "Aren't you going home at all?" Evie asked him. It was the summer session, so she knew she had to prepare. "Why, do you feel sorry for the bed?" He smiled back. "No, I'm sorry, but you can't just do that. You have to go home sometime anyway," she told him. No pity, then, and don't talk about it. He moved over to her and hugged her. The girl had gone down the crooked path again with the guys from the unfamiliar company she had started using, and now it was just like it had been back then at school. "Tell me, what does your father do for a living that he can afford such a thing?" Murphy asked the girl one day. "I don't know. Something to do in court," she replied, because she really didn't get involved in her father's business. "I see," the young man answered her then, and they never returned to the subject again. When a young man wanted to earn money, his friends offered him an easy option. He refused at first, but then agreed. He had to take some small packets from them and sell them to others. He did it wherever he could. He went to school, high school, college, institutes, everywhere. When he thought of punishment, he immediately thought of his girlfriend's father and believed that if something happened, she would ask for it and he would get him off. But it couldn't go on like that for long. So Evie put Murphy at the table one night. She set the table. They were going to have dinner. And the girl started telling Murphy that he was doing a bad thing by doing this. Because he wasn't really making money, he was just poisoning young people. Murphy didn't contradict her. He realized what he was doing. But he didn't want to give it up because the money was really not bad and they could live on it. For a while, Evie didn't know how to influence Murphy, so she decided to talk to her father about it. Yes, it was risky, but there was nothing left to do, because if he was arrested, he wouldn't keep quiet, and he would tell what she knew about her, and didn't say anything to anyone. "Dad," hi, she called to her parent. Of course, the girl didn't know where to start the conversation. "Oh, daughter, hi, how are you?" Vincent said. She didn't call that often, so the man now wanted to keep her on the phone longer. "I need to meet you and talk to you," she told him. "Okay. I don't mind. Where and when?" he asked her. "Let's meet at the cafe near my house," Evie mumbled. She didn't feel like going anywhere. "Okay," Vincent answered. He didn't mind sitting with his daughter for an hour or two, and it didn't matter what kind of conversation she was having. When the daughter and father met, she began to tell him what Murphy was doing. Her father shook his head. He understood, rubbed his napkin in his hands, and sighed. "Dad, why are you sighing? Give me some advice," his daughter asked him, because she had no one else to ask. "And what can I advise you? It's a legal case. And now that you've told me about it, I realize that after the promotion that's coming, I'll probably be the judge," he told her. "What am I supposed to do? He's a good guy. But this case is ruining everything," Evie almost cried. "Of course I'll meet your Murphy, but don't expect anything good to come of it," the father said very sternly, not how he envisioned his meeting with his daughter. The girl looked at him, and now she too thought that she had told her father everything for nothing. She got up from the table and went to the exit. "We're done talking." Vincent threw his napkin on the table, finished his coffee, and rose from his seat. It had been a few days. Evie had already passed her summer session. Everyone was on vacation now. Her father called her, told her that Murphy had an appointment today, and she was happy, but she didn't know what that would mean. "Murphy, hello." Vincent saw the young man enter the cafe. It was the same cafe where he and Evie had met. "Hello," he approached the table and crumpled, not knowing what to do for a long time. "Tell me, what's going on in your life?" the man asked him. "And what happens in it?" "Nothing special. We live," shrugged the young man. "It's understandable that you live. How do you live? Good, bad, or okay?" Vincent looked down on Murphy. "Just like all the other young people live," he mumbled to him. The guy was generally uncomfortable sitting here talking about all this. "Well, tell me how all the other people live," Vincent wondered. "I do something, get money, and then..." "Well, I think you know what they do." Then Murphy stood there looking at him. "Of course I know what they then do." "And how do they make that money?" Vincent asked, because he was interested in hearing it from someone else's mouth, not his own head. The young man realized that he was about to be asked questions again, It's what you do for a living, Murphy realized what Vincent was implying. So you can't make any more money than that? Vincent tried to get the young man to come clean. What did she say to you? Stood looking at him, Murphy waiting for the man to tell him something. She didn't tell me anything, Vincent sighed, realizing that this guy wasn't as simple as he wanted to make it seem, and now he needed to get him to talk more, which he wasn't going to do. Okay, I hear you, Murphy told him, and he wanted to go, but Vincent wouldn't let him. He wanted to slow him down at all costs. Wait, he shouted at him. What else? Murphy turned and looked at him the way only enemies are looked at. Understand me, I am not your enemy. Even if I tell you something now, it is only for your own good. Do you want to end up in a damp room somewhere, behind bars, with who knows what happening to you? Vincent asked him, because he knew what they did to people like that. No, I don't, Murphy answered him. And it was true, for he didn't do much of anything. So get a grip on your head. The young man listened to him, said nothing in response, just turned around and walked towards the exit. He had other plans now. He was angry at the girl, why she had told all this. And to whom? Her father. How could she tell that man about him? After all, he could report him to someone. But nothing. He would talk to her, and then Evie would understand. Now Murphy needed to think of a plan that didn't involve him as the main character, but as a secondary character. He came home and didn't answer his phone for a couple of weeks, and then, as if nothing had happened, he went back to Evie's house. Hi, he said to her as if he had just gone out for bread 5 minutes ago. Hey, where have you been so long? She looked at him and couldn't understand what had happened. Nowhere. It was business. I had to prepare for everything, he answered her, while he stood and watched her reaction. What have you been preparing for? You don't work anywhere. You don't study, you don't do anything, she was amused. Evie, what if we had a party here? He asked her, because he wanted to have some fun. Of course I don't mind, she wondered why he was asking about it now, because he'd never mentioned it before. We'll have a party, call some friends, and then… I don't know, he fell silent and smiled. They walked to the kitchen. Evie had just made lunch. Murphy sat looking at her, thinking about what kind of plan to make, although he already had one, but a very cruel one. Of course, Evie suspected nothing. She cooked quietly, put it on his plate, then put the bread and everything else in front of him. She was ready for any conversation now. So Friday we'll invite some friends over and rock out, right? Murphy looked at her, waiting for approval. Of course we will, the girl smiled. She was so glad he was back. She could take any offer now. And since his mood was cheerful, she thought, his father hadn't said anything bad to him, and they had just talked. Now Murphy didn't know how to make sure Evie didn't guess anything. On Friday, as planned, they had invited a lot of guests, some of whom the girl had just seen for the first time. Evie's college acquaintances and Murphy's friends were here. Many of them Evie knew, but still not all of them. The girl was cutting up some appetizers. Murphy was making alcohol. He liked different cocktails, so they had bought everything they needed for that. In the evening, they turned the music up loud, danced, sang songs with the singers coming from the speakers. Everything was fun and great. Evie could see that Murphy had stopped doing something bad. It made her feel happier. It had been so many days, and she hadn't even once noticed him with anything. That couldn't help but make her glad either. And now, with some more friends staying over at night, Evie felt very dizzy. She went and lay down, unsuspecting. The next day everyone was gone, but there were still some left. Evie wanted to clean up, but Murphy offered her another cocktail. Come on, we'll clean up tomorrow. I'll help you, he waved his hand at her. Okay, we'll clean up, she said, and took the cocktail from the boy's hands. But because the music was loud for the second day in a row, the neighbors must have called his father. Not a couple hours later, Vincent was outside the apartment. He knocked on the door, stood and waited. Who's there? Evie came to the door. She didn't know when she'd started asking. Open up, it's your father, he said sternly, because he couldn't stand it anymore. Evie opened the door, and of course everything shook inside her. She didn't know what to think. She wasn't in the right state of mind anymore. Her father picked up some friends who were still here. He just threw them out of the apartment. After that, shoveling the piles, he went into the kitchen and sat down on a chair. Daddy, what are you doing here? Who told you? Her daughter looked at him with big eyes. "Evie, what did you and I agree on?" He looked sternly at his daughter. "Dad, it's the weekend. We can't relax, especially since Murphy and I made up a couple days ago." She looked at the young man. "That's right, with Murphy," he told her, then shifted his gaze to the young man. The boy looked at the man. "And you, have you drawn conclusions for yourself?" he asked him, because he couldn't stand liars. "Yes," the man only replied. "So that in 15 minutes there's no one in this apartment, but you," the father shifted his gaze to his daughter, and you could tell he wasn't kidding. Evie realized that Daddy was no joke. She walked Murphy to the door, dressed, and left. "And now you took a mop in your teeth and cleaned up everything here," said her father strictly. "Do not think that if I give you money and rent an apartment, I will always be so kind." Vincent was clearly angry with her, but there was nothing he could do. Evie promised him that everything would be done by morning, and he could even come and check it out. Vincent promised that he would definitely come. After that, he left, and Evie went into the room, sitting down on the DVJ. She couldn't. She was dizzy and drowsy, and she didn't know what to do now, because she was so excited because the place was such a mess, and she had to clean it up. But she didn't know how to do it in this state. After everything was done, she collapsed on the bed with no energy. She just didn't have the urge to even lift an arm or a leg. Then the girl closed her eyes. She decided to sleep for a while, but she didn't manage to do that, because not even a couple of hours passed when the door began to be banged on. "Who else is there?" She got out of bed, walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and there was Murphy, with numerous other friends. "Hi," the jolly fellow waved at her. "What do you want here?" She opened the door, looked at Murphy. "We're here to keep the party going," Murphy told her, as if nothing had happened. "I don't need anyone here right now, so go ahead and come back Monday morning," she said, and wanted to close the door. "If we're here, we'll stay here," he said. After that, the people who had come to see her entered the apartment and went into the kitchen. Murphy started mixing them some cocktails again. Everyone was drinking, having fun. There was music again. Evie was on a roll again. She didn't know what was happening to her, but she had to do something. "Why didn't she recognize you at all?" Murphy asked his friends. "And she's never even seen us," they laughed. Her hands were dropping, her head too. The girl went over and told Max about it. After that, the young man took her to the bedroom. He put her on the bed. He himself lay down next to her. "Murphy, don't," she whispered. "Not really in the mood for love-making right now." "Relax," he mouthed to her, because he didn't want her to say or do anything right now. Murphy began to remove her dress. Evie moved, but very sluggishly. She was pushing Murphy away, but she wasn't putting much effort into it. So the guy made quick work of her. She felt really good. She rolled her eyes, but she didn't think much of it, realizing that the man she loved was with her now, so nothing would happen to her. After that, he brought her another cocktail. She drank it, and now her head was in a state of confusion. Everything was spinning. She was looking at the ceiling, and she didn't know if she was in the room or somewhere else. And then Murphy took her in his arms and carried her into the big room. There were a lot of Larrys there, all of them guys. Evie realized she wasn't in good shape, but she couldn't do anything about it. No arms, no legs, nothing moved. Murphy laid her down on the DVJ. Someone was saying something. Evie didn't understand anything at all. She just lay there, unable to move. "What are you looking at me for? Get on with it," Murphy said to one of his friends, and it was a whirlwind. Somebody picking Evie up, letting her back down. They were doing all sorts of things to her. And then she felt like she was lying on the floor. Her head still wouldn't go back into place. It was so bad she couldn't do anything about it. "Go check her out," Murphy said to one of the men present. Evie was lying on the floor, her whole body aching, like she'd been kicked or something. She tried to do something, but couldn't. She felt like she was no longer alive at all. Her eyes wouldn't open. She groaned. Someone bent over her. At that moment, Evie opened her eyes and was immediately hit in the face. "What are you doing?" Murphy asked him. She looked at me. He turned back to him, and Evie was done, gone into the darkness. She didn't understand anything, just lay on the floor and didn't move. Check to see if she even has a pulse. One asked the other. They bent over the girl and felt for a pulse, but it was as if there was none. Everyone was scared, so they decided to just run away from the apartment. But Murphy knew if they just ran away, it would be bad for them. "Okay guys, let's get the rug and wrap her in it," he told them, because he didn't see any other way out, only this way. Quickly, several pairs of men's hands grabbed the rug, rolled Evie into it. After that, they carried her outside. "Where are we taking him?" The man looked at Murphy. "Let's go to the neighbor's yard, throw it in the trash, and that's it. Just walk away," he said. That's what everyone did. After they did, and they were a safe distance from the dump, Murphy told everyone that he'd put drugs in Evie's cocktail, and not a few. What if they notice? The others were afraid, because they were here too. Well, they'll notice and notice she was like that, maybe she did something somewhere. My father personally kicked me out of that apartment, and he knew I wouldn't come while he was there, he laughed, because he thought he had fooled everyone. Well, we're here, the other young man told him. So what, they came, and then they went. Murphy seemed indifferent to what they had done. After that, they went to some pub, sat down, and started drinking. The guys just didn't think about anything, neither about Evie, nor about the rug, nor about the dump where they had left the rug. But it was time to go home, so the friends split up. They told Murphy before they left that if anyone asked them anything, they had nothing to do with it. It was all him. He agreed, for he didn't care what anyone thought. He was really sure that nobody would be looking for Evie except her father, and he didn't care about that now. And who would find her on that dump? A car would come in the morning, they would take out the garbage, and there, on the big dump, nobody would need her. He came home quietly. It was very late. He went to bed and forgot about what had happened today. But in the morning he got up, his head hurt a lot. He did not think about anything, only about where to get a new dose to take it. Evie woke up. She couldn't do anything. Her head was still spinning. She realized she was either bound or something else. Her head hurt so bad she just couldn't do anything. There was also that nasty smell in the darkness. Where she was, she didn't realize. She started moaning because she didn't have the strength to scream anymore. Her whole body ached so much that she just couldn't do anything about it. Then she felt someone canting her, as if she had been pulled from somewhere and carried. "Wait, man, I think there's someone in the carpet." She heard a voice from outside. After that, the girl realized that she was in the carpet. "Who will be there?" "Look at the normal carpet. We'll go and make a bed there. We'll be fine," said the other one to him. They walked on, then shook Evie's head even more. "Okay, quiet everybody. Listen," said one of the men. Everyone quieted down and listened, but there were no sounds. "What are we supposed to hear?" someone in the crowd asked. "Quiet, I can't make out what we need to hear. Just let's all be quiet together, and maybe we'll hear something," the same rattling voice said. Everyone was silent and listened, but nothing was heard. Then they decided to put the rug on the ground and think. "What, do you think this carpet would look good in the basement?" Someone asked about it, and the others began to clamor. Evie didn't understand anything at all. She felt so bad, she thought she was dying. "In the cellar, everything that you don't bring will look good," answered the other, because he knew what was going on down there. It was good that they were allowed into the house, because the janitor was kind, otherwise they would have had to wander around. But the men rested and got ready to go on. The three of them picked up the rug, threw it on their shoulders, and were ready to go when there was another groan. "There, you heard," said the same senile voice, even having to repeat it more than once. "We heard, but what is it?" The one who kept asking didn't understand. "How do I know what it is?" "I think it's from the carpet," he said quietly. "You're hallucinating already," VJ the other told him. "What hallucinations?" Listen, Evie heard him say, and when he said listen, she moaned again. She couldn't speak, so she had to moan. This rug was squeezing her so hard on all sides that she just couldn't do anything else. The girl moaned some more, and then some more. It wasn't until the rug was placed on the ground again that she realized it was about to be unrolled. She had to coordinate the movement so that she wouldn't get dizzy or worse. Help Evie spoke softly so that the others would realize that there was a person here. They began to unroll the carpet altogether. There were 4 of them, and they were very careful. The carpet was very large, but they managed. Now that they had unrolled it completely, They saw that it was a woman or a girl. It was hard to make out. "Look at her," said one of the men who had just told VJ he was glitching. "We need to get her to the hospital right away," said another. They began to tell the few passers-by that the girl was ill and needed to go to the hospital, but they all shied away from them. Then it was decided to carry her to the basement with the rug. Somehow they lifted her up and carried her. She didn't look very big, but she weighed a lot. When they reached the cellar, they were all tired. But there was not much left, and then the men took her by the arms and legs and carried her down into the cellar, laid her on the same rug where she had been lying, and began to examine her. "Look at her. She's all torn up," said the same VJ who was examining the girl's body. "And what to do? You can't do without a hospital. Anyway, the doctors have to examine her," said someone else. They did not know what to do, how to be. Then VJ stood up. He raised his index finger up, as if he had thought of something. He left the basement and went to the janitor's office. He wanted her to call an ambulance, but when he got to her, it turned out she wasn't home. It was unknown where to look for her. Then the homeless people decided that they could deal with the problem themselves. They started looking for something to sanitize their wounds. They had only 3 bottles of alcohol left, which they had left for tonight. They had to sacrifice them. "Here, take these," one of the men handed them the caskets. Nothing was too small for them now. They took some dirty rags and began to shake them off. Then to clean Evie's wounds. She was moaning, delirious. Someone took her temperature, just a hand touching her forehead. It was learned that she probably had one, but we still had to wait until morning. In the morning, VJ ran to the janitor again. He finally got her to call an ambulance. The woman did as he told her. She was also frightened, but did nothing. And now they waited together for the ambulance. When the paramedics arrived, they examined those who had rescued the girl, smirked, but did not refuse them, because they had taken the Hippocratic Oath to help anyone. The paramedics saw that the girl looked normal, picked her up, placed her on a stretcher, carried them into the ambulance. The lights came on and the girl was taken to the hospital. She was no longer delirious, but seemed to be in the other world. The doctors examined the body of the young girl once again in the car, realized that the girl had been beaten and also raped, but none of them would do anything now. It was necessary to put her in a state of stability first. When they arrived at the hospital, Evie was placed in one of the rooms. The doctors immediately rushed there, and when they started to find out everything, it turned out to be the daughter of the local judge. "Oh girl, who did this to you?" someone said above her. Evie heard some words, but she couldn't make anything out. She was put under anesthesia so that she could not feel anything. Something had to be stitched, something had to be repaired. The doctors were fighting for her life, and also for her blood, for she was unknown where, unknown with whom. Immediately the suspicion fell on those very homeless, that they most likely found a drunken girl somewhere, and abused her, and then called an ambulance. And now they were afraid and hiding in their basement. But no one cared about that yet. Now it was necessary to find my father and tell him everything, and then let him take any measures against these bastards. Evie lay under the drips. She couldn't regain consciousness for a long time. She kept babbling and saying something. When her father arrived and sat down beside her bed, he just put his face in his palms and cried bitterly. "My daughter, who did this to you? You only tell me the name. I will immediately this man into several pieces." He sat beside the bed and told her. But Evie couldn't tell him anything yet, because she was in no condition to do so. Vincent went out into the corridor, met the doctor, and asked him how his daughter was doing. He told him everything. The father felt incredibly sorry for his daughter, imagining at once what those bandits might have done to her, and how they had dealt with her. But now, while nothing could be done, because he did not know for sure, these bums, not these bums. But just in case, he sent the guys who had arrested these scoundrels, and now they were all on their way to the jail. "Tell me, where did you meet this girl?" The investigator, who had been appointed in charge of the case, asked them. "We didn't meet her anywhere. We just found a rug in a garbage dump," they said, hiding nothing. "So what? The rug's in the dumpster. And there was a girl in it?" He didn't understand. Yes, it was like that, they told him. "Well, what happened next? Why didn't you call an ambulance?" The law asked them. "Yes, we called her, or rather we wanted to call her. but no matter who we approached, they shied away from us, as if we were contagious, said one of the four. Okay, and then how did you get called in? The investigator was just curious. In the morning, I went to the janitor, and she called an ambulance, said VJ, who went to her both morning and evening. Okay, what was with the girl when you found her? The interrogation continued. She was all torn up, and we didn't even spare our last cup and rubbed all her wounds with alcohol to disinfect them, said another man. So I understand you, said the man in shoulder straps. He looked at his comrade, and then began to write down something. The homeless people sat there, looking at each other, not knowing what to do now, but they had to tell everything. This is the first time I've seen such decent bums, the uniformed man told them. Well, take a good look and remember, VJ laughed. He was just shocked that today really hadn't worked out that way. The girl they had found was unconscious, and no one knew what would happen to her next. The whole time they were sitting in the ward, the doctors were fighting for Evie's life. It was when she regained consciousness that everyone quickly ran up to her with papers. They had to take statements and ask who the scoundrels were that had done such a thing. Evie spoke a little, but she told them everything honestly, about Murphy and his friends, but she had very little strength and she fell back into unconsciousness. Get away from her, Vincent said. He'd been calling his ex-wife Larry for the past hour, but she wouldn't pick up the phone. Vincent couldn't understand how a mother who'd lived with this girl for so long could be so disinterested in her daughter, but now he was seeing it for what it was, and there was nothing he could do differently. Vincent had taken some time off work, taking care of the girl because it was important to him that she survive. And now he knew for sure that she would, because she'd come to several times, giving some kind of testimony, talking. Dad couldn't understand how this could have happened at all. Murphy, who had promised him that he would be decent, that he would do everything and not do anything, had arranged this. Or maybe he'd set it all up because of him. Vincent stopped and stared at one point. Then he started thinking about it. Well, that wasn't the point, so Vincent pushed those thoughts aside and walked over to his daughter again. Evie, my love, I realize now how wrong I was. Perhaps when you came from your mother, you needed support, warmth and care, and do you want a separate apartment, of course, well on, please. He was talking to himself because the girl was unconscious again. She was lying on the bed and he was sitting beside her. Vincent knew she was beside him and could hear him. As he sat by his daughter's bed, he promised himself and her that he would get his revenge and he wouldn't let it go. He didn't know if Evie had hurt him or not, but he knew that once she recovered, no lawyer would save that scum from punishment. Vincent knew exactly what he would do, what he would say, and how he would punish the man who had done this to his daughter. Now we had to wait for Evie to come to her senses so she could testify. I didn't really want to try innocent people. And so, a few weeks passed. The girl finally came to her senses. She just lay in the hospital. Vincent asked her every day about things, about the situation, about everything. Evie told him, but often averted her eyes, ashamed of her father, that it was mostly her own fault. If she hadn't gotten involved with Murphy, if she hadn't let him into the apartment, none of this would have happened. Her father would reassure his daughter he would tell her it wasn't her fault, to not blame herself. But Evie lay there, she was crying and laughing. Vincent thought at first that she had something wrong with her head. Honey, calm down and know that your father is the best in the world, he kissed her. Now, after everything that had happened to the girl, he just couldn't leave it like this, without a solution. After taking his daughter home, he had already decided exactly what he was going to do, and how to punish the scumbags who had done all this to his little girl. The first thing he did was find Murphy, who was the instigator of it all. When Murphy saw Vincent, he wondered why he'd found him, since he hadn't done anything. But Vincent didn't want to hear it, because he knew exactly who had started it and why it had been done. Well, weren't you waiting for me? Vincent asked him. No, why? The boy didn't understand. Murphy was very surprised. But when Vincent began to tell him about Evie, he was even more surprised because the boy thought the girl had rotted in a dumpster long ago, and her body had never been found. What, I can tell from your eyes you're surprised? Vincent asked him. No, I don't know anything at all, Murphy answered him. I can see in your eyes how you don't know anything. The man was very upset that even though Murphy was playing the game, He was doing it very poorly. Vincent pressed charges against Murphy. Of course, it wasn't real now, because the investigators would be coming. But he was afraid Murphy would see Evie, and then he'd be off somewhere else. So it had to be done here and now. "So you come with me and turn in your accomplice," as he twisted his hands behind him and led him behind him so he couldn't do anything. "What are you doing?" "It's not my fault. You hear me? It's not my fault," Murphy screamed. "It's up to the police to decide whether you're guilty or not." Vincent pushed him ahead of him. Murphy didn't resist. He walked ahead of the man, stumbling over every bump, but still moving forward. It wasn't very pleasant, but there was nothing left to do. Vincent rubbed his hands together because he'd caught one of the bastards. Now he had to find the others, but how could he do that if this thing wouldn't talk? But he knew the police wouldn't let anything go to waste, and Murphy would definitely start talking. Murphy was taken to the police station. Vincent didn't know what else to do with him. He left him there and sternly ordered the policemen not to let him go. They just shrugged their shoulders. Of course they wouldn't let him go, but how to get information out of him about the others who were with him? "It's okay. Shake it a little. It'll tell you everything," Vincent told them. The interrogations began, and they didn't end until the evening. Vincent knew he couldn't get much out of Murphy, but he also knew that the guy knew a lot, not just about information, but about Larry. And right now, he could make the cops' ears pop. So Vincent decided to go blackmail. He goes to the police station. "You know, and I know what this guy's been up to," I said deliberately, so the guy could hear it all. Then turned to Murphy, looking at him. He sat there, staring unblinking. "Go ahead," he shrugged. "Why are you looking at me like that? I tell you. The drug you were distributing was found in my daughter's blood. Not that you didn't add it to her," Vincent asked him. "Why are you doing this? I promised you I wouldn't do it anymore," Murphy said, sitting back in his chair, his hands clasped behind his back, almost crying. "You also promised me that you would cherish and nurture my daughter, my little girl," Vincent told him back, almost crying himself. "All right, and I'll tell you," Murphy said. And he looked at everyone sitting here, silent at first, but then he got ready to speak. The guy realized that if Vincent opened his mouth now, he'd just get added time on top of everything else. "Yeah, we went to Evie's party, and I was really pissed that she'd talked to her father, that she'd told him the whole story about me, and I wanted to get back at her somehow. So when she'd had a few drinks, one of them was filled with," he paused, and then he said what he'd put in it. "There you are," Vincent banged his fist on the table. He couldn't listen to this scoundrel's confessions. "That's all, and then it was just a matter of time. She blacked out, then she passed out. We thought she was dead when we wrapped her in the carpet," Murphy admitted. "I see, names, surnames, patronymics the girl's father demanded of him." Murphy told everything. He didn't hide anything. And within 3 days, everyone was brought here to the police station. Vincent stared at these men, and Evie wouldn't even stand next to them, let alone lie down. He looked at one, the other, the third, with contempt, realizing what scum they were and what they'd done. But he was powerless now. If he started doing something of his own, he wouldn't be forgiven, but his time would come. The cops were interrogating. There was a lot to ask, a lot to do. The men were locked up in a holding cell. They gave testimony. Most of it was true. And who would have thought that the father worked as chief magistrate? Because Evie had said her dad worked in a court somewhere. No big deal. And it turned out to be. Murphy couldn't understand how it could happen that this girl's father was a judge in this town. But it was all done now, so it was too late to make a fist. Evie had finally come to her senses. She lived with her father, became very modest, did not go anywhere all the time, saying that she did not like anything. Everything did not matter. Her father forced her to go out to do something, but she didn't want to do anything at all. "Daughter, will you come with me to the trial? Do you want to see how these freaks are executed?" he asked her. "Dad, please don't make me do more than I can do," she asked him. "Yes, of course, darling, whatever you say," he told her. And that's all. After that, the men were convicted, all given different sentences because everyone was guilty. Some did one thing, some did another, but they were all guilty of not providing first aid to a dying man. No one argued with that, so they just stood in the cage with their heads down. Murphy looked up for a moment, looking at Evie, and she was looking at him at the same time. "Dad, how could he do that?" Evie asked her father later. "I can't tell you anything. He's just a scoundrel, a man who doesn't appreciate the feelings of others. And he doesn't care at all what the people he talks to think, which is also proved by the fact that he sold these illegal substances to children who then died. Not all of them, of course, but probably many," he said. "Yes, and the truth always triumphs," Evie agreed with him. "Yes, it had to end, and it did. And I think it was the logical end to the whole story." The father hugged his daughter. "Dad, if it hadn't been for you, imagine what they would have done to me." They were sitting at home when Vincent's phone rang. He looked at the display and Larry's name came up. "Ah, come to think of it," he said, and showed his daughter's cell phone. "Don't take it," she asked, because like her father, she didn't want to socialize with this woman. "Okay, whatever you say." Vincent dropped the call. After that, the daughter and her father started living together. No more rented apartments, nothing that could affect the girl's life. "Dad, don't we ever thank those homeless people who helped me?" Evie asked one day, because she remembered what they had said and done, and she felt sorry for them. "Look, I've thought about it before too, but I didn't know what to do," he told her. "Let me find them and bring them to you," she mumbled. "Okay, look for me. Bring me. I'm waiting for you," Vincent said, and smiled at his daughter. Evie stepped outside. She looked around. She needed to find the 4 men who had rescued her, but she had no idea where to find them. She was in some kind of basement, but she didn't know which one either. Then she began to remember what they said, and thought that they could not carry her far, so she went to the yards that were near her house. She found a janitor in one of the yards and asked her if she had called an ambulance. "Excuse me, can I ask you a question?" She approached the woman. Of course, the woman looked at her. "Do you happen to know 4 homeless people?" Evie asked the woman. "I used to know them, but they haven't lived here for a long time." She pointed to the basement. What was very surprising was that this house was practically next door to her house, meaning that those who had killed her, or thought they had killed her, had just carried her out in a palace a few meters away from her own house. Evie was flabbergasted. She was both amused and wanted to cry, but she did neither of those things, just asked where to find the 4 men who had helped her survive. "Oh baby, you know, these are such good people. They have always helped me in everything, and I, while no one knew, helped them too," the woman told her. "So you know where to find them?" Evie asked. "Now I don't know where they are, but she pointed to the basement and said they were sometimes there in the evening." "Thank you so much." Evie shook her hand. "Oh girl, weren't you saved by those 4? I called an ambulance then." "It was you." The woman looked at her point blank. "Yes, that was me, and now I want to find these men and do something good for them," the girl admitted to her. "And you leave me your cell phone number. As soon as they get here, I'll call you right away," the woman said. "That's a great idea." Evie didn't think of that right away. She wrote her numbers in the notebook the woman carried with her at all times, said her goodbyes, and left. When the girl came home, she told her father everything. He was surprised how his daughter, unconscious, delirious, but still, remembered something. He praised her, and they sat down to dinner. "Daddy, you know what I realized. Even if you are a homeless man, and you live somewhere in the basement, there can still be something human in you." The daughter looked at the man. Yes, he nodded his head and said nothing more. "Why are you so pensive?" Evie asked him, because she wondered why her father was usually so talkative, but tonight he was silent all evening. "Your mother called," he told her in just a few words. "And what, did you answer her?" she asked. "Yeah, and you know what she told me?" Vincent continued to stare at the girl. Of course not. She didn't understand why she had to pull this information out of her father now. That she'd been sick all this time. She was sick. And she was in the hospital, my father said, at which point he was digging into his plate with his fork. "And you believed her?" Evie raised her big eyes to him. "I don't know," he shrugged. They didn't talk about anything else that evening. Evie went to her room, lay down on her bed, covered her head with a blanket, and began to remember how things were in their family. Here was a young and happy mom who was always telling her something, taking her in her arms. And here's Dad, he's just as young and smiling all the time. What happened? Why did everything happen like this? Why did she become like this herself? The girl cried. Now she wanted so much to call her mom and tell her everything, but she never decided to do it. The girl decided that if she called, she would do it not today, but tomorrow. After that, she closed her eyes and tried to sleep. During the night, she dreamed of different things, mom and dad, some friends, something else. She tossed around the bed, couldn't calm down for a long time, but eventually she fell asleep, and she doesn't know what happened next. In the morning, when Evie woke up, she saw the missed call light on her phone. The number was unfamiliar, and so she immediately thought of the janitor Thea, with whom she had recently spoken. What if those men had gone to their basement again? She saw them, and decided to dial Evie. She called back the unfamiliar number, and a woman's voice answered. Hello, she heard. Hello, you called me, Evie said, listening to see who it could be. Hello, this is Murphy's mother, the woman mumbled. What? Why are you calling me? Evie didn't understand. I just wanted to apologize for my son. He's always been mean to the girls, and what they did to you is out of line. Evie could hear the woman crying. You're not upset. Everything's fine. At least for me, she told her, and she didn't feel like talking anymore. Evie had recovered in her studies. Now she had to practically retake the same course she had left behind and hadn't studied for a long time. It had been about 8 months or so, and her phone rang again. Evie hesitated to pick it up for a long time, because the number was unfamiliar again, but she couldn't miss the call from Thea. Hello, the girl said. Evie, hi, it's me, Thea, remember me? I'm the janitor from the house where you were looking for the bums, she said. Yes, of course, hello, I've been waiting for your call for so long, and you haven't called. I thought maybe you lost your notebook or something else happened, she said quickly, because she was afraid that Thea would just hang up. So yesterday I heard that VJ and his friends were in the basement again. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then when I went downstairs I saw that they were really there. I wanted to tell them about you, that you've recovered, you've been discharged from the hospital, and now you're looking for them to thank you. Thea spoke as fast as Evie did. She didn't know what she was afraid of, but it didn't matter to Evie now. She listened to Thea, wondering how to get this information to her father, and where to find the homeless people. She asked Thea if she had talked to them. No, I didn't get a chance to talk because I was afraid they'd get scared and leave, the woman told her. Well, do you know when they might still be there? The girl asked. Evie, you know I've followed them, and I know where they're dwelling now, Thea admitted to the girl. So where do they live now? Evie wondered. They had gone quite far away, but in order not to be terrorized and not to be found, moved into the basement 2 blocks away from this house. Where they found you, said the woman. Wow, can you show me? Evie was so happy to have found her saviors that she didn't think about anything else. Thea, of course, agreed to show her where her saviors now resided, and they agreed to meet. You know, I can't do it now, but in 2 days I'll come to you and we'll go together to where these people are, Evie said, and hung up the phone. After talking to the woman, Evie went to the kitchen where her father was drinking coffee. He was going to work. How are you doing? He asked her. I'm doing great, how are you doing? She kissed her father on the cheek. I'm doing fine too, he told her and looked at her and smiled, seeing that his daughter was happy. Oh, Daddy, I just got a call from that janitor from the yard where those bums found me, and she told me that she saw them again. Not only that, when they went out this morning, she followed them, and now, when I have free time, I will go to them, and we will find them, she told her father. That's great news. I don't know how we're going to thank them, but I don't think they're going to charge us. What else do they want? Ivy smiled, she didn't say anything, and now she was thinking only about how she could finish all her business and go to Tamara Egorovna's meeting. Everything was fine. The term paper was written. Exams were passed. And now the girl is going to the very yard where she was found in the carpet. She arrived, but the janitor was nowhere to be found. Of course it was sad, but she was not going to go anywhere. Sat down on a bench and waited for her. She had enough time, so she could sit. Thea didn't show up until 2.5 hours later. When she first saw Evie from afar, she immediately gasped and remembered that they had agreed to meet, but what day they hadn't agreed on. And now Thea wanted to talk to the girl. "Hello, my dear." She came up to her. "Thea, where did you go?" Evie asked her. "Yeah, where I went. It's not there anymore," she told her, waved it off and laughed. "Well, it's understandable that you're not there anymore," Evie laughed too. Thea took a seat next to the girl and began to tell her how she had heard that men were coming to this basement again. "Tell me, Thea, how can we thank them? Will they take money from us or something else?" The girl wondered. "Oh, Evie, I'm going to tell you all about it now," the woman told her. She sat next to the girl like that, folded her hands in her lap, and began to broadcast. Intrigued, Evie looked at her. "You realize that if they are homeless, they have nothing. One of them told me that he had lost his memory. The second one, when he got a job, they took away his passport, he ran away, and without a passport, they don't hire him anywhere. Well, of course you can make one, but you have to go to so much trouble. So they all live without a passport, without memory," the janitor told her. "Okay, we'll make passports for them, but that's a small fraction of what we can do," the girl said. "Yeah, passports are a small part of it. I don't know. Offer them money or something," Thea thought. She wasn't a rich woman herself, but what she was doing was fine with her. "So you promised me you'd show me where the four of them live now?" Evie asked her. "Yes, of course, we'll go with you now. I'll just get changed." She went into the entrance, went into her den, stayed there for a short while, and went back out to Evie. Wow. She saw that Thea was wearing some kind of coat, even though it was old, but it suited her face. She was also wearing boots that she must have found in a dumpster, and she was carrying a purse. Evie checked out the outfit, and they walked down the sidewalk a couple of blocks to the house where Thea thought the men who had once helped Evie now lived. And they were indeed in that house, just as Thea had told them. As soon as they saw Evie, they immediately went somewhere. "Wait," Evie shouted to them. "What do you want?" They stood there like stumbling blocks. "You're a sight for sore eyes," she told them as she approached. "We don't know anything. We didn't do anything. We're not guilty of anything," they began to say in order. "Yes, I know you didn't do anything. I'm looking for you to thank you," the girl told them. "We don't need anything. We have everything," said one of them suddenly. "I know you don't need anything, but can I make you some papers?" she asked. "Papers?" They looked at each other. "You?" "Yes," she nodded. "Of course you can. Why can you do it?" The men were immediately animated. "First, let's get acquainted. My name is Evie, but I think you already know that. What's yours?" She looked at them. She wanted to know which one of them was VJ. "I'm Freedy," the man she wanted to recognize immediately introduced himself. "Okay, who are you?" She looked at the next one. "And I'm Aiden," the man said. He was very embarrassed. "Okay, Aiden. Who are you?" She looked at the next one. "I'm Max," he said and chuckled, probably not knowing why he did it. What's so funny? Evie didn't understand she was serious in front of them, and they were making fun of her. "He doesn't remember his name or where he's from or who he is," VJ told her then. "All right, well, what about you?" She looked at the last one. "And me, Pete," he told her. "I see you're all such intellectuals. How did you get here?" she said. "You know, things happen in life. We're homeless right now, and we don't even know how we met. We just started living together, and we just kind of grew attached to each other," VJ told her. "Promise me that you will not go anywhere from here." "I'll go home now, tell my father, and then he'll find you and do what he can," the girl told them. "Promise?" Thea looked at them. "We promise," they said, and looked at each other again. "Okay, I believe them. Let's just make a deal. You don't go anywhere. I tell everything to my father. He makes your papers. And only after that you and I may or may not part. Or we may or may not stay friends," Evie told them. "Good," they replied. After that, she actually went home, waited until the evening when her father came home from work, and told him everything right away. Her father was very flattered by the work his daughter had done. He praised her, thanked her, and now there was only one thing to do: meet with them, and do everything they asked. Vincent was a man of his word, and if he wanted to help these people, he meant to do it. Now he was going to find out if he could restore the documents to the very homeless men who had saved his daughter from certain death. It turned out that it wasn't that hard to do. And if they were smarter, they could do it themselves, and long ago would have been with the documents. As soon as the man found out everything, he immediately went to the address that his daughter had given him. "Hello, fellow homeless," he greeted the four men who were sitting near the entrance on a bench while no one was there. "Greetings. And who are you?" they asked the man. "I'm the same father you've already seen," he winked at them. "Oh, that's right," Judge said VJ and smiled with a toothless mouth. "Tell me, how long have you been in this position?" he asked them. Whoever VJ spoke for everyone. "I see. So you're the smartest?" Vincent asked him. "It works out that way," he nodded. "So are we going to restore your documents, your memory, your family ties?" The man in the beige coat looked at them. Yeah, Max nodded at him, looking at Vincent like he was some kind of celestial. "That's it. I need accurate data. And I'll do everything in the shortest possible time." He took out a notebook and started writing something down. Everyone except Max dictated everything to him. And he doesn't remember much. How he came, where he went. "We took him into the company out of pity," Pyotr Fedorovich said. "I'm clear, wait here. Or will you come with me? And I'll get you a hostel. And you can stay there for a while?" Vincent asked. "If I may," VJ said quietly. He could already see that no harm would come to them from these Larrys. "Of course you can." Vincent looked around at the men. Yes, they weren't very clean, or rather quite dirty, but he sighed and opened the car door. As soon as everyone got in there, the cabin immediately smelled like something other than the Christmas tree that had been hanging there. Vincent opened the windows, held his breath as long as he could, and they drove off. Not half an hour later, they were all there. Vincent stared at the back seat, thinking he was going straight to the car wash. "Thank you." The men thanked him tirelessly as they received their room keys. Yes, they had been put in one, but the girl at the front desk didn't want to do that either. "Do you realize we'll have to burn this hostel down?" she said to Vincent, but when he offered to pay quadruple, according to the number of guests, she didn't argue with him. "That's it. I'm off. Expect me in the next few days," he told the men, and walked out of there. He went straight to work. There was a lot to settle, and that matter with the bums. Vincent found out that VJ's relatives had been looking for him for a long time, and so had Pete's, and it wasn't clear what was wrong with the two of them. "I'll take care of it," he said, and looked at the assistant prosecutor who was helping him with all the questions. She was a charming young woman who drove Vincent crazy. And indeed, the man figured it all out. Before making the documents, he contacted the relatives of all the men they were looking for, gave their names, and sent a photo. A few days later, they were here at his place. And when he arranged a meeting, the relatives couldn't be happy. As promised, Vincent made all the documents they needed. "I was wondering, you didn't lose your memory. Why didn't you come home?" he asked VJ. "And how could I have come empty-handed? And then I thought that my wife had forgotten me." He hugged the woman. "You guys," Vincent shook his head. Now it was just a matter of finding Aiden's relatives, but that was the hardest thing to do. He couldn't remember his last name, but the photo he'd been given had helped his relatives find him. Max, on the other hand, was the hardest. Not only did he not remember his last name, but his name was fictitious. "What am I supposed to do with you?" Vincent looked at him. "I don't know." After what happened to him, his face was also a bit deformed, so no one recognized him from the picture either. "Vincent, can I ask you a question?" Somehow they met again, and now Thea was with them. "Of course, why do you ask?" He looked at her. Actually, she was the one who made sure the ambulance came. "Is there somewhere to put Max and me alone?" She was embarrassed. "Of course. And you won't drink?" Vincent wagged his finger. No, they made big eyes. "So where do you live now?" He wanted to go somewhere else, but he stopped. "I have, but nobody knows about it. They allocated me a utility room in the entrance." "That's where we live," Thea said. "It's clear to me. If I buy you a room in a communal apartment, is that enough?" Vincent asked them. Of course not. She wanted to hug Vincent, but didn't dare. Everyone had their papers in their rooms now. Evie wept when she heard what her father had done. At that moment, her phone rang. Evie looked at the screen. It was her mom, and she couldn't help but answer it at a time like this. "Hello," the girl said. "Daughter, hi, I'm so sorry," Larry sobbed into the phone. "Mommy, I love you so much. Can I come visit you on vacation?" Evie asked her and looked at her father. Of course, Mom was still crying. Evie pressed the reset button. She realized now what she had done in her life. She wanted so badly to make things right, and she had plenty of time to do it.